Good evening and welcome to the September 21st meeting of the Westborough Planning Board. We have a joint meeting tonight with the Select Board to review the master plan. We have a couple other items on the agenda. I just wanted to go through that first. First item is the joint presentation to the Planning Board and the Select Board of the final master plan. We also have a continued public hearing for 400 Freiburg Parkway. That will be continued to a future meeting. And a public hearing for 64 Otis site plan review, and another public hearing for 66 Otis site plan review. So why don't we start with the master plan presentation. Jim Robbins, I'd like you to just introduce this, summarize where we're at and the next steps on this. And then, and I don't know, is the Select Board comfortable there? Okay, good. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, as you know, we've had...
One quick thing, if I can just, since this is supposed to be a joint meeting, I can also just say that if it's after 6:30 p.m. on September 21st, 2021, the Select Board of Town of Westborough is hereby convened.
Thanks, Alan. Appreciate that. Go ahead, Jim.
Okay, thank you. As you know, we've had three public hearings, actually 4 public hearings on this with the residents of the community prior to this evening. The time period for public comments closed on the 9th of September. Those public comments have been entered into the final draft. And this evening, we would like to discuss with the selectmen any of their thoughts on the master plan going forward. This evening is the final public hearing for the master plan document itself. The next step after this would be for the planning board, either this evening or at some date in the future, to formally adopt the master plan. That's what the state law requires. It's that the planning board adopt the plan. Back to you.
Okay, great. Lester, I would like to introduce Lester Hensley. For those that don't know him, Lester is chair of the Master Plan Committee and has a few comments before we turn to our consultant, Donnie Corris-Gold. Go ahead, Lester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Board, members of the Select Board. Lester Hensley, 39 Arch Street. I'm very pleased to be here tonight to present the final draft of the 2021 Town of Westborough Master Plan update. This is and has been a living document right up until this very moment. My last assignment in this regard, other than to perhaps present the adopted plan at town meeting, was to provide a preamble letter to go at the front of the master plan. I got that complete today. So it's not in the document that you have to review, nor that Donnie will show. So I thought I'd read that so that you understand what's coming. You can ask any questions about that or make comments. So to the Planning Board, Select Board, and residents of the town of Westborough, thanks and appreciation are extended to all who have contributed to the creation of this update to the town of Westborough Master Plan. In particular, we are grateful to the residents of the community who engaged in the process and whose contributions richly enhanced and informed the work of the Master Plan Advisory Committee, 25 local residents, officials, and municipal employees calling on their experience, knowledge, expertise, and demonstrated commitment in planning for Westborough's future. The town can be particularly proud of the effort and focus of the committee and participants in maintaining a positive and future-focused mindset throughout the process, despite the backdrop and limitations on gathering imposed by a global pandemic. In doing so, their breadth of vision and depth of focus make this document a powerful guide to policy decision-making. The overarching feedback from the community was clear. Balance future growth against the preservation of the elements of environment and culture that make Westborough a uniquely desirable location in which to live, learn, recreate, work, volunteer, and age. As a document, it is comprehensive and thorough, richly grounded in context, and broadly reflective of the values and priorities of the community. As a plan, it provides clearly articulated goals and actions for implementation of initiatives to achieve these goals. But this plan is even more than that. In what might be a first, this plan added sections for sustainability and climate change and also for public health. Through these chapters, the 2021 Westborough Master Plan explores not only the land and how it is used, but also the lived experience of community members interacting on the land, and with an eye towards managing resources locally that will support and sustain resources globally. The 11 chapters of this master plan are meant to be read and acted upon in total and in relationship to one another, despite and because of the tensions and conflicts in priority that might exist within and between them. Town leadership would be wise to consider the whole when considering actions prioritized in any given chapter. Additional thanks is extended to VHB Consulting and particularly to Donnie Goris-Kolb for the diligence in ensuring that this living document was updated with all relevant feedback all the way up to its adoption, and for providing a beautifully produced, illustrated, and readable document. For and on the behalf of Hazel Nurse, Vice Chair, and members of the Master Plan Advisory Committee, Lester Hensley, Chair. So I will submit that for inclusion in the final document, but I think it frames up really how I and the committee and my Vice Chair Hazel feel about the document we've created. I think it's a fairly extraordinary piece of work, and it is long, it is dense, it contains facts and background about Westborough. I learned an awful lot about a town that I thought I knew well, having done my schooling career here and raised my children here. It's incredibly rich. And it's really rich because of all of the participation and the extraordinary amount of volunteer hours, not to mention the professionalism and commitment of all of our staff and town officials. So with that, I will turn it over to Donnie. Donnie is going to take you through the master plan at a high level. It is 251 pages, so we won't go do a deep dive. But I think from this review, you'll get a strong sense of the document and all of its context. So unless there are any questions for me, I'll turn it over to Donnie. Mark, anything? Anyone? Okay. Donnie.
Thank you, Lester. All right, as Lester mentioned, Donnie Goris-Kolb with VHB. I'm here today to present the final draft of the master plan, final version of the master plan. There have been quite a few iterations of this throughout the course of the planning process, and you'll see here tonight that we have a robust document, complete, as Lester said, with incorporations from the community in terms of their feedback and their input throughout the process. Here we have the cover of the master plan itself, and I just want to highlight that a lot of the pictures here are reflective of the activity of Westborough. So you have Arts in Common, which is, I'm seeing a lot of signs throughout this particular building and throughout town today. On the upper portion of the document, you do have the memorial in front of Town Hall, some retail activity, some farmers market activity, the representation of the school and the academic priorities of the community, as well as some natural aspects that make Westborough a vibrant community holistically. So here's an image of Lake Chauncey. So again, what I'm going to do is take you through the document at a very high level, beginning with the first chapter, which is the introduction of the planning process and the community vision. This chapter really goes into the background of the planning process, what a master plan is, and again, the master plan is really it's really meant to be a guiding document. It's not a regulatory document. It's not a statutory document. It's meant to provide decision makers within the town administration and the boards and the committees with guidance on how the community feels about particular issues. And it's meant to be a 10 to 15-year document, so it's future-looking, but it also provides some accommodations and some inclusions for the shorter terms and the midterms. It does include several chapters that are regulated by the Massachusetts state general laws: land use and development patterns, housing, economic development, natural resources and historic resources, open space and recreation, public services and facilities, transportation, and there is an implementation chapter, which I'll get to in just a moment. As Lester mentioned, a bit novel to the master planning and certainly to Westborough is the inclusion of a sustainability and climate change chapter, which is largely built upon the recently adopted climate action plan produced by the Sustainable Westborough, or spearheaded at least by the Sustainable Westborough Committee, as well as a public health chapter, which I see Jody Hensley is in the audience here. She was part of the public health subcommittee on the advisory committee, and that looks at several health indicators and looks at the community and the activities of the community, from active living to age and dementia and similar concerns. So getting into the planning process, we did divide the planning process into 3 different phases: Westborough Reflects, Westborough Explores, and Westborough Confirms. And that those phases are broken out even further into discrete steps. So as part of Westborough Reflects, we looked at and identified Westborough's issues and opportunities. In other words, we spoke with stakeholders, we looked through the data, reviewed the data, and identified, where are Westborough's challenges, where are the barriers, where are the opportunities that are internal and external, and how do we capitalize on them. Westborough Explores is the second phase, and in that phase we set Westborough's shared vision, which I'll read in just a second, and develop supporting goals. And we also developed and prioritized supporting actions to help achieve those goals and that ultimate vision. Westborough Confirms, we created an accountable implementation program, which is included in the implementation chapter, and we pulled it all together for review and adoption, and that's why we're here today. And we do have this highlight just as a future input to detail when this plan was adopted by the planning board and the town more holistically. What we do want to identify and highlight throughout this master plan is the work of the Master Plan Advisory Committee. So the Master Plan Advisory Committee was made up of more than 20 individuals that represent various departments and boards and committees of the community, and as well as residents. What was novel for this particular project in the planning process is that we had student representation. Viggy from the Westborough High School was present on the advisory committee, and he had substantial contributions throughout the process. But as you can see, the advisory committee was broken out into different subcommittees, as I alluded to earlier. Each of the chapters, each of the elements that comprise this master plan had an individual subcommittee, and those subcommittees worked internally and then with the other subcommittees to develop the inclusions of this plan. And I just want to highlight, Hazel Nurse and Lester Hensley, both the vice chair and the chair, respectively, of the advisory committee, guiding VHB and guiding the larger advisory committee throughout this process. Public engagement. Public engagement is a big component of any master plan, and that is no doubt true for the Westborough master plan. And in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, we continue to have robust public engagement. But beginning the process, as I mentioned, we did have the MPAC, the Master Plan Advisory Committee, which we broke out into those subcommittees. But the MPAC really prioritized having broad and inclusive outreach right from the start. So at one of the first MPAC meetings, we developed a community outreach database, which identified groups and representatives of groups that are traditionally left out of the planning process or don't, or voluntarily leave themselves out of the planning process for one reason or another. And we, using that database, we assigned ambassadors from the MPAC to those representatives to provide updates on a regular basis of what's happening on the master plan and invite participation. Additionally, the MPAC performed extensive in-reach. So this particularly relates to the implementation program, but once we got to that stage, we needed to ensure buy-in. There's a lot of implementation partners and leaders that have been identified as part of that program, and we want to make sure that what we're proposing as part of the master plan implementation is feasible within the timeframes that we identified. We also had and started this process with an open community tour that was participated in by members of the Select Board and the Planning Board and the Master Plan Advisory Committee. And we conducted some targeted stakeholder interviews as VHBs and Landwise. Also, Landwise was a consultant on this project. I do want to give them a shout out and thank them for their participation, particularly for the Economic Development chapter. But we did provide conduct targeted stakeholder interviews to really gain an early understanding of what the challenges and opportunities are in Westborough. We had a in-person, believe it or not, an in-person public forum to kick the public engagement process off, more broadly speaking, and that was conducted in association with a community-wide survey to, again, get some ideas flowing in terms of what is applicable to Westborough and what, what the community would like to see in terms of a goals and vision. We had an economic development roundtable, which we invited members of the business community, the real estate community, to understand what makes Westborough attractive and drives economic activity, and what are the biggest economic challenges in the community. And again, that was Landwise that helped plan that. We did have a virtual public forum, which focused on exploring the goals as they were drafted and exploring the ideas and strategies that could enable their achievement, and that was well attended despite it being a virtual event. That virtual event was held by Zoom, but was also broadcast by Westborough TV, and we should all give, I would like to give thanks to Westborough TV throughout this entire process. They've been here with us every step of the way for every MPAC meeting, every public engagement. They were truly great in getting the word out and providing the recordings after the fact. But what I wanted to highlight as part of that virtual public forum is that we did have an opportunity for all participants, regardless of how they were viewing the meeting, to participate through real-time polling software. So that Poll Everywhere software that we use really united folks that were viewing the meeting through Westborough TV or participating directly through Zoom. And what we did do is we modified the approach to public engagement because we wanted to make sure. Sorry. What we did want to make sure is we modified the public engagement process. In the in-person forum, when we analyzed who attended, we noticed that many folks from multifamily housing developments weren't attending. So we ended up, targeting, Arrive Westborough, for example, and similar development, housing developments to ensure greater participation from that demographic. We also had one student-focused survey, as I mentioned, spearheaded by Viggy, and that survey solicited ideas for the betterment of Westborough from the perspective of the youth of Westborough, and we had a second community-wide survey, so that's our third community-wide survey for this particular project that was focused on exploring the recommended actions and their prioritization. And we also had some community conversations that were spearheaded by Lester Hensley and Jim Robbins, and we had one public hearing that was recently conducted on September 9th of this year. And you do see some of the advertisements that we shared with the MPAC and some photographic evidence of some of the community conversations. Up here is Jim at the Holiday Stroll in 2019. And here's a picture of folks participating in the virtual forum. And lastly, for the public engagement process, what I do want to highlight is that we had a robust interactive public website or project website, westboroughmasterplan.com, and that particular website provided, the typical website functionality of providing documents, providing meeting notices, enabling, traditional comment form submissions, but we had enhanced engagement tools at our disposal that we utilized, in particular the ideas submission tool, which you see a picture here of, where many folks were able to just submit their idea and have them publicly viewable. Others in the community would comment on them or like them. We also had a storytelling component where we asked the community, how can Westborough and the community of Westborough emerge stronger from the COVID-19 pandemic, and how has Westborough changed over the years? And lastly, members of the Planning Board and Lester Hensley and Hazel Nurse also participated in various interviews throughout town, in particular Westborough TV and the Frank and Mary in Westborough show. So with that, that's the general planning process and the public engagement process, and both of those culminated in a high-level vision statement, goals, and actions. And what I wanted to do today was just read the vision statement and summarize its components. Incorporated in 1717, Westborough is a New England town between Boston and Worcester that is home to a diverse community with a strong sense of pride and can-do spirit. This is underscored by its commitment to equity and inclusivity, as well as widespread civic engagement and participation. Our people are what makes Westborough great. Together, we have reflected, explored, and confirmed our vision for the future. We are a community that will be, and then this vision statement goes into several items that are a focus of the community, it being a balanced community where the town and the community looks to balance new development with the ambition to preserve historic, cultural heritage as well as natural resources. Be connected, meaning that they want to be inclusive socially, educationally, recreationally, and culturally. Desirable and accessible, so making attractive neighborhoods and offering exceptional school systems. Thriving, the town wants to be a hub of economic activity at the crossroads of Mass Pike, I-495, and Route 9 within the Metro West region, and it wants to continue the economic success that it has had over the years. Multimodal, speaking to transportation and the transportation networks. It wants to create more linkages to regional commuter rail systems, expand the network of pedestrian and biking facilities, and in relation to that, enhancing the trails network, including the charm bracelet. It wants to be sustainable, its policies and actions reflecting a commitment to continuously lessening the town's environmental impact, both locally and globally, and focusing on public health and mental wellness in the process. And lastly, reflective of the strategic plan that was conducted in 2018, being a town government that is trusted, that provides innovative and high-quality municipal and educational services by means that are consistent with its mission and values. So that is the overall vision, and that vision was the guiding component of much of the master plan, including the goals and the actions that support the achievement of the goals. So lastly, in this particular chapter, what I want to do is just highlight those goals. I won't read every one of them, but I'll give the high-level overview. So for land use and development patterns, again, the town wants to provide a balance of land uses. They want to ensure that the land use regulations, policies, and procedures are easy to use and make sense for today and in the future. It wants to revitalize the downtown and preserve its historic components, but increasing the vitality and the sustainability and the livability. And it wants to protect that New England village that is prevalent throughout the community. From a housing perspective, it wants to diversify the housing stock, improve opportunities for affordability in housing, and plan future residential developments in consideration of constraints that the town has in terms of its facilities and services. Economic development, leveraging local and regional organizations like the Corridor 9-495 Chamber of Commerce. Ensuring the town's economic development policies promote success across various sectors, office parks, small businesses, retail corridors. Improving Westborough's major shopping centers like Bay State Commons, and improving connectivity with those shopping centers and surrounding neighborhoods, including the downtown. Foster partnerships and programs, both public and private, to advance workforce development, to prepare for the next wave of job opportunities. And lastly, under economic development, collaborating with property owners and businesses in the downtown to empower them to make advancements for economic growth. Natural, historic, and cultural resources, coordinating the management and the protection of Westborough's assets. Actively supporting biodiversity, continuing to preserve the town's historic assets, extending the town's awareness of and basic understanding of its historic and cultural heritage, so just making sure that the community is aware of its heritage resources, and expanding the town's cultural offerings from a program standpoint. Open space and recreation, broadening the protection and responsible use of the vast open spaces of the community, which is a priority of the town and growing. Continuing to expand the town's network of recreational and commuter trails, again, like the Charm Bracelet and the B-Walt. Providing public recreational programs and facilities that are both indoor and outdoor and are representative of the community's diversity. and the needs of that diversity. Public health and, public facilities and services, supporting the school department and continuing to deliver high-quality education, ensuring the long-term sustainability of the water, sewer, and stormwater infrastructure, aligning the town's facilities with the community needs and long-term vision, and there's a diversity component there as well, and ensuring the town is adequately staffed and trained. There was a 2020 staffing study that was completed by the town, and that's incorporated throughout this master plan. Transportation and circulation, so enhancing the infrastructure within and proximate to downtown to improve the operations of that area from an efficiency and transportation safety standpoint. Planning for transportation improvements along the key corridors like Route 9. Considering past studies, expanding and improving public transit options. Advancing projects that focus on safety throughout the entire town and the town's town-wide transportation network. And proactively establishing policies and programs for the future need of Westborough's transportation network. So thinking future ready, what EV infrastructure, what autonomous vehicle infrastructure needs to be in place for the town to be successful from a transportation and circulation standpoint. And related to those two novel categories, sustainability and climate change, mitigating greenhouse gas emissions at a community scale and across the town's municipal operations in alignment with state goals that were recently updated. Reducing waste, so municipal solid waste from the town's operations and at the community level by 30% by 2030, and now that's consistent with DEP goals at the state. Safeguarding local resources, including its people, against the impacts to climate change, so building adaptability and building community resilience. And lastly, under sustainability and climate change, providing some community education around climate mitigation programs, again, to help build support for the goals and actions of the master plan and the climate action plan. And that's going to be very important to achieve both the goals and objectives of both of those plans. And lastly, there are two goals under public health: making community health, physical and mental, a planning priority, and address emerging health challenges and underlying social determinants. So at the beginning of this process, we had no idea that COVID-19 and a pandemic of that level was going to occur during the planning process, but it certainly influenced the goals of the public health chapter and the actions that fall underneath them. And lastly, amongst all of the goals overall, advance Westborough as an age-friendly community, enabling persons of all ages to feel welcomed and stay connected and be active. So Westborough is, like many other communities in the Northeast and more broadly, is an aging community. So the number of persons over 65 is relatively high, and it's growing. So how does the community plan for that and to become an age-friendly community? So those are the high-level goals and a summary of the planning process and the public engagement process. The last thing that I do want to do is just show off one individual chapter. And we'll begin with the land use chapter. So each chapter, might just take a second to update here. Each leading page is joined by a highly vibrant and colorful image that depicts and represents the topic at hand. So land use and development, you do see the land use development patterns to the left-hand side. Each chapter is introduced, what is meant by the topic, what is meant by land use and development patterns, and how does it relate to Westborough. It gives the planning context, so this is very important, looking back at what Westborough has already done for the 2003 master plan, which was the latest master plan prior to this iteration, and the 2018 strategic planning services summary report that I referenced earlier, and other relevant plans for each of the individual topics. It goes into a baseline conditions analysis, and as Lester mentioned, this is fairly comprehensive. It goes into a lot of detail about what the conditions of Westborough are relative to indicators and metrics that are relevant to the topic. Vibrant maps that depict the overall, whatever the topic, whatever is trying to be conveyed. In this particular instance, land use from a 2005 perspective, going into a 2019 perspective, and then so on and so forth. Again, a lot of photographs, and again, thank you to Westborough TV because they did provide a lot of the photographs that are included in this report. And then concluding each individual chapter is a summary of the issues and opportunities that the Master Plan Advisory Committee identified after reviewing public feedback and reviewing the baseline conditions analysis. That fed into the goals and recommendations, which are replicated in the implementation chapter across all different elements. So that's just a very quick hit on what an individual chapter looks like. And if I may, lastly, just go into the implementation program, which is quite extensive, but the point of the implementation program is really to give the town and leave the town, once VHB and Landwise are out of the picture, sort of a roadmap and guidance into how to implement the goals and actions of the master plan to achieve that overall vision. So if we dive in a little bit deeper here, the implementation matrix goes into list all of the individual elements along with their goals and their actions. And for each individual action, it lists the related elements to identify potential synergies between different actions amongst different elements, implementation leadership and implementation partners. So again, we sought that in-reach within the town to get that buy-in. So we identify who's going to be primarily responsible for the implementation and who can provide some assistance or some influence on that action and the implementation of it. We do give an order of magnitude cost estimate, a time frame, whether it's a short term in the 1 to 5 year time frame, 5 to 10 year time frame for a mid-year term, and then 10 plus years. And again, the planning horizon is about a 10 to 15 year period. And then the last column here is the priority. So through public engagement during the last community-wide survey that was held virtually, and there was also some in-person and hard copy versions of that, we asked folks to identify which actions amongst an individual element rose to the top of importance in terms of what is highly needed by the community or highly desirable by the community. And that translated into low, moderate, and high priority ratings. So this is really the document that we're going to hand off to the implementation committee if one is to be created, or otherwise town administration for the implementation of the plan. And this is really that guiding roadmap for the town to take and run with everything that's been provided by the community and the ideas that have been generated as well by the MPAC. So that is that high-level overview. If there's any questions for myself or for Lester or for anybody on the planning board, we're happy to take them.
Start with the planning board. Any questions or comments? Select board, anything? Well, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody involved with this. It's been a long project and it's a long document, but
It has.
I agree with Lester's comments that it's a rich and fulfilling document and should provide guidance to the community for many years. So I'm really excited to have this resource in our future decision-making. As a board, we have to consider whether we want to vote to adopt this master plan tonight, or if you want some time to reflect, we can put it on the agenda for Tuesday. It's really, heard you, Jim, say that you're prepared to vote. Tim, any preferences on that? Okay. Somebody'd like to make a motion?
I mean, I'd like to see it adopted. I think I probably not appropriate.
Hazel, you were
for
vice chair, so I'd like
I
you
was
to
going
make
to
a
say,
motion. So go ahead.
you'd like me not to.
I'd like you to make a
Oh,
motion.
okay. Good.
I do have, if I can interject, I do have just a summary of the comments and the responses to those comments and the changes that were made since the September 9th, if I may.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom.
Yep. So during the September 9th public hearing, we heard from several members of the community with respect to comments. One was just to ensure that the Metro West Chamber of Commerce was appropriately referenced throughout the document, and we went through the document and made sure those references were correct. We had heard a comment from Don Byrne from the Active Transportation Committee that he preferred to refer to bicycle facilities instead of bicycle facilities, micromobility facilities, and we made that change. So micromobility modes of transportation include bikes and scooters and light electric vehicles, e-scooters and e-bikes as well. So he sees, as well as the Active Transportation Committee sees, a move more toward various modes and not just traditional bicycles as we see them today or have seen them in the past. There was a reference, again, to bicycles, related to Action 3-1 to refer to walkability and bikeability. So we changed Action 3-1 to rethink the traffic patterns around Bay State to maximize vehicular access along with walkability and bikeability. So that was a very simple, change. It didn't really change the intent of it. Really, the pedestrian nature of the area needs to be improved, and for safety and for accessibility. So that was one change that we made there. With respect to Goal 1 of the transportation and mobility element, there was a comment about bicycle parking. So we did go ahead and update Transportation Action 1-2 to read, in coordination with OSR Goal 2, prioritize the development of pedestrian and micromobility accommodations, including sidewalks, trails, and public space provisions for bikes, scooters, and light electric vehicles that connect downtown with proximate neighborhoods and assets resources, including public transit options. We also updated the Transportation Action 5-2 to read, update the town's policies and bylaws, including site plan review regulations to drive implementation of bike, pedestrian, and electric vehicle-friendly facilities in conjunction with redevelopment. So the idea there, or the issue at hand, was that, as the town regulates parking, perhaps the town should consider regulating, bicycle parking and similar accommodations. Land Use and Development Action Item 4-3, there was a concern about including, there was a recommendation to include reference to a right to farm bylaw. We already include a right to farm bylaw reference, so we simply, under natural, historic, and cultural resources, so we simply said, in coordination with NHC Action 1-2, which is that action that does propose considering and exploring a right to farm bylaw. For the Transportation and Mobility 2018 Sidewalk Plan, there was a concern about just making sure that multi-family housing developments were accommodated here, Arrive Westborough, Windsor Ridge. For housing, there was a comment about thinking about new developments and redevelopments for housing, and mainly subdivisions, and making sure that they're connected with other subdivisions and to the downtown and other neighborhoods. So collectively, to address both of those comments, we modified OSR 2-6 to read, continue to look for opportunities to build sidewalks to connect neighborhoods with a focus on large multifamily developments to make Westborough a more interconnected and walkable community to promote social and physical interaction. And lastly, Sustainability and Climate Change Action 1-6. There was a question about, the need or the constraints that are imposed by simply referring to electric vehicles as something to purchase and own. So we did revise Action 1-6 to read, investigate opportunities to incentivize the purchase of electric vehicles and electric bicycles utilizing excise tax rebates or other means. And then we added, or otherwise encourage increased access to such vehicles through rentals or car sharing programs.
Thanks, Tony. One of the things I've appreciated is your responsiveness to public comments and suggestions throughout the whole process.
Thanks.
I think my feeling is we could fine-tune this document for the next year and probably still have suggestions and comments, but the benefit of this document is that it is adaptable as we go forward with decision-making in town, and that it's a guide for us. It's not, 10 commandments. So regardless, let's move
On
forward.
motion,
Hazel,
sure.
did you have a motion?
Yeah. I move that the planning board adopt and endorse the master plan for the town of Westborough. And is there a specific date on that yet?
Is there a date on the plan that we should reference in the document?
Oh, is there a date on the plan? No, it simply says September 2021. It actually says October, because we were planning.
October.
We can change it.
October, I don't know, I don't think we could endorse something that, I think it's just the.
September, and he'll change it
Yeah.
to September on the final
Right,
document.
2020-21.
Second that.
Okay, Pete seconded. Any discussion of the motion?
Now, I'd just like to make one comment that I have really enjoyed working on the master plan. I've enjoyed working with Lester Donnie, and all the members of the advisory committee. I specifically like to point out that we worked so well together that I was very impressed with the input that came in from the members of the advisory committee as well as the community, and how people made a real effort to participate in the plan. And I think based on that, we've got a very solid foundation which we will be able to use for many years to improve the quality of life in our community for everyone.
Thanks, Hazel. All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion of the motion? Okay, all those in favor of adopting the master plan? That's 5-0 in favor. Great. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank the Select Board for coming in. I believe that ends your participation for tonight, but one of the things I'd like to discuss with you before we move on to the next agenda item is we have to reschedule an executive session.
Mark, I don't think we can really hear you whether you're talking into the...
Okay. I thought since everyone was in the room that we could find a date that would work for the Select Board and the Planning Board. I know that we have a joint meeting scheduled Tuesday. I cannot get here until 5:30, but I don't know if you'd be willing to do 5. Christie, do you have any comments? Tuesday's not a joint meeting? I thought Tuesday was a joint meeting.
No, I think it's just the planning board on the zoning.
Okay, do you have a meeting on Tuesday? Okay. Okay, what about after your meeting? How does Wednesday look? Everyone here could look at their... Would a 6 o'clock meeting work? How does
But the 29th?
the 29th? 5:30 or 6, I'm not sure yet.
That's okay.
I'll be remote all next week, so
Okay,
if we provide for that, I can attend.
yeah, we'll provide for that too. So, what did you say? Rather 5:30 or 6?
6 would be ideal.
So the planning board could make it work at 6 on Wednesday. Is that doable for the select board? Right, and Tim Kohler will have to be remote as well, so yeah, we can post it as a hybrid. Christie, will your office post that, or is that our office? Okay, and it'll be across the street? I don't know where the CPA meeting is.
Firehouse? Here.
Okay, so we'll be across the street at 6? All right. Okay, thank you. I appreciate the time. Thank you for coming in. We'll see you next week. Select Board. All right, next item on the agenda, we're going to skip over the 400 Freiburg because that'll be continued. We'll take care of that at the end of the meeting. Kristen, don't let me forget. And the next item is the public hearing for 64 Otis Street, site plan review and special permit applications. I believe that is Atlantic Management. And Attorney Buckley, if you could identify yourself and your team and begin your presentation.
Excuse me. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, Robert Buckley, Reamer and Bronstein, I have with me this evening from my office Christine Hung, who's been working with me on this matter. From the applicant, Joe Zink, the principal, John Sullivan, and Grady Capabianco. We have our site civil from Sims Maney McKee, Brian Lawler, and Will Park, and our traffic engineer, Bob Michaud from MDM Associates. This is almost a continuation of the prior meeting. I'd just like to set the tone, and we approach this a little different from the usual design and presentation. When we began this process, which it really was on an adjacent property, 50, a number of years ago, where there is now the robotics facility, we had the inkling or the belief that we were going to continue the development down the corridor. And working with your planning staff and others in town, we decided that we would be proactive and try to anticipate how we design this. So we're here this evening for what I consider a continuation of what that initial thought process was, which is we are proposing a 170,000 square foot facility that would have a portion of the project as robotics, as well as a mini fulfillment center. And we can go into that and if you'd like, but it's more of an efficient way of doing that last mile daily delivery. But we also were cognizant of some of the issues that working with your planning staff that the town was focused on because you were in the midst of the master plan. And one of them, for instance, sustainability. This building will not use fossil fuels. The other was productivity, using, this was heretofore, and from a tax standpoint, an unproductive piece of property that we are going to put on the tax rolls because it was subject to an agricultural exemption. And more importantly, working with the planning staff, there was concerns about the corridor. So we said, let's do it in reverse. We said, let's do a corridor study as part of our mitigation for purposes of 50 that would create a, for lack of a better term, a master plan to develop the corridor. And so we would design to that master plan, that corridor study, so that issues that we wouldn't address it in a piecemeal manner, but more of a overall coordinated development proposal, so that not only for us, but others on the corridor, as they execute their plans, there was some rational thought processes behind it. So that's what we did. We front-loaded a corridor study. So in the usual presentation, we'd go through the site plan. With the indulgence of the chair, what I'd like to do first is show the corridor study, which has been done, and then show the site plan, how we designed to implement that corridor study. So with that, I would ask Bob Michaud to walk the audience through the corridor study.
Go ahead, Bob.
Great. Thank you, Bob. For the record, Robert Michaud. I'm a principal with MDM Transportation Consultants based in Marlborough, Massachusetts. So as the board has heard about the master plan update, it's very timely in that the quarter study that was prepared by MDM for this quarter actually builds on materials that are specifically included in the master plan update as they relate to development along and near the Otis Street quarter, which is shown in this aerial diagram, and it certainly shows the relationship of the 60 to 64 parcel here, but the quarter study really extended well beyond just that particular parcel to include a number of other intersection or parcels in the quarter. So with that, as Bob had mentioned, the quarter study really was funded by and a commitment for the 50 Otis Street development. The scope of that study was discussed with the town and sanctioned by the town so that we had a firm understanding of what we should be studying, which intersections we should be studying, and making sure that we're coordinating properly with a consultant for the master plan update. Ultimately, what the quarter study does is it evaluates the transportation needs in a multimodal way, again, consistent with the master plan update for the quarter, assuming long-range growth. So growth that would occur over decades, really, As is more specifically outlined in the quarter report, what we call moderate growth assumptions, which are the assumptions that are used in the master plan update, as well as high growth assumptions, which go a step beyond that and assume a highest and best potential case for development along the Otis Street corridor, including the parcels at 60 and 64. That provides a framework for corridor infrastructure that is, again, multimodal and long-range looking. The intersections that were evaluated begin at the Route 9 corridor to the north, all the way to the Fisher Street corridor to the south, and many of the commercial driveways in between. The most prominent location along the corridor, of course, is the Smith Valley Parkway, the signalized intersection. It provides a very important gateway to the MBTA station here. In the course of doing the study, we not only look at these specific commercial driveways and gateways that serve the corridor, but also the multimodal functions, the MBTA station, the sidewalk infrastructure, bicycle facilities, either nearly in place or planned as part of BWALT, for instance. So we take all that information, we build it into our baseline understanding of that corridor, and then look forward from that point under the two scenarios I just mentioned, the moderate growth scenario and then the high growth scenario. The specific parcels that were considered are identified in this map. You can see that the one that's highlighted is particular to 60 to 64 Otis Street. It's fairly central to the corridor. Just to the south of that, the 50 Otis Street project, which is now developed, and itself has a high growth assumption built into its permitted conditions, as well as the 66 Otis Street parcel, which is also the subject of hearing later on this evening. In addition to those central parcels, there are a series of parcels along the Gleason Street corridor that are industrially zoned, as well as along Valenti Drive, Fisher Street, and at the corner of Route 9 and Otis Street, the Target Plaza. So all of those, which have been identified through the master plan update, serve as the basis for estimating where traffic is likely to be if and once those projects are all built out to their fullest potential extent. I will point out that the nature of the assumption in the quarter study is on the basis of an industrial land use category, which is kind of a standard category that would be applied for planning purposes, although there are specific exceptions to that would include 66 Otis Street, for instance, which we knew would not necessarily be in that realm of development, but rather something closer to a restaurant or recreational type use. And likewise, the Target Plaza, which would fall into that same category of likely restaurant or retail type use. So the result of that, without getting into the nitty-gritty of every aspect of the quarter study, which is the subject of another presentation to the town, is that we began our focus at the Route 9 and Otis Street intersection, which was the subject of a road safety audit, another condition of the 50 Otis Street project. And through that process, which is now complete, a series of safety-based recommendations that will be the responsibility for near-term safety implementation by the 50 Otis Street applicant developer. In addition to those, the long-range improvements identify structural changes that would need to happen over time to accommodate the high-growth level scenario for the corridor. And you'll see in this diagram that would include a substantial widening of the northerly end of Otis Street at Route 9 for additional lane capacity, particularly dual left turn movements to Route 9 westbound. The implementation, and this is where multimodalism comes in, the implementation of a component of the BWALT trail system, a particularly wide shared use path that would begin in the vicinity of the Arrive complex on the north side of Route 9, would have a dedicated crossing of Route 9 on the west side of the intersection, would then continue its alignment on the west side of the corridor, all the way to Smith Valley Parkway, which you'll see in a moment. As we proceed To the central portion of the corridor, which is really the focal point of the hearing tonight for 60 to 64, we see one of the primary elements of the recommendations is the consolidation of access points along the corridor to nodes that could eventually be signalized. The first of those, I believe the board members are familiar with, is the target driveway, the closest significant driveway to the Route 9 corridor, followed by the RK Plaza driveway, right? Neither of which is signalized today, but are nonetheless periodically influenced by how Route 9 functions, vehicle queue backups in particular. The outcome of the recommendation was the potential to relocate the target driveway as far south of Route 9 as possible within the confines of its property boundary in a way that would allow for cross-connecting driveways at adjoining parcels, the target parcel itself, as well as potentially 66, the gym property, and Moe's. And there are feasible, viable ways to cross-connect those driveways, though the focus of the corridor study was not to determine every aspect of how that would happen. The second major consolidated location was the RK Plaza, which, if it were to be signalized in the future, would also want to be as far from the Route 9 corridor as possible and appropriately spaced from that other location, the target driveway, at least a 600 to 800 foot distance. And we know that it's feasible to do that within again, the confines of its own property limit on the RK Plaza side. And that presented the ability to tie in other commercial driveways, as we'll describe in a moment, including 60 to 64 and potentially future signal at that location, with the ability to cross-connect to that driveway as well, particularly from 50. As we proceed towards Smith Valley Parkway, you'll see the continuation of that shared use path along the west edge. You'll also see the introduction of a new sidewalk connection on the east side of the roadway that would essentially knit together the campus that comprises Columbia Tech on the northeast side of the roadway. Through local landowner engagement process early in the corridor study, we identified that as a high-level need so that folks who are need to access the multiple buildings that comprise Columbia Tech could do so on foot rather than necessarily getting into their cars and going from building to building, which happens today. You'll also see along various sections of Otis Street pedestrian crossings that would connect the shared use path to that sidewalk system and connection. Eventually, also a new crossing of Otis Street in the approximate alignment of the B-Walt Trail System, which is shown in dashed format here. It flanks 35 Otis Street on one side and proceeds through the Hockomoco Pond property on the west side. You'll see that potential crossing right there. As we approach Smith Valley Parkway, enhancements for ADA compliance at the intersection, signal upgrades to ensure that it's fully ADA compliant, and introduction of an appropriate turn lane into the Columbia Tech campus. And then finally ending at Fisher Street. This set of recommendations really provides the framework for what we're going to be describing tonight for access that's associated with a specific development project, as well as how that might relate to other parcels like 66 next door. With that, I will present a more detailed assessment of transportation following a discussion of the site plan, the civil engineering aspect of the project, which I'll hand to Brian Lawler.
So, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, as I said, that our goal was, starting about 2 years ago, working with the town and the other property owners, was to develop a master plan for the corridor. And then we designed to that master plan to try to implement the recommendations. So Will and Brian will now take you through the site plan, and then we'll come back to Bob to talk about the associated traffic with the proposal.
Thank you, Bob. My name is Brian Lawler, principal with SMMA, with my associate here, Will Park. Will's going to take us through the detail of the site plan, but a couple of just general comments. Firstly, the SMMA Atlantic Management team is essentially the same team that designed and constructed the 50 Otis Street project. So we have a very consistent team that will be working on this project also from a design perspective. Architecturally, we're very focused on the experience from Otis Street itself in terms of choice of materials, careful building design, orientation of the building. Bob mentioned that it's an extremely energy efficient building, and it will be through the selection of the HVAC systems, which will be air source heat pumps. Will essentially be able to eliminate the use of natural gas or other fossil fuels. And that's just the beginning of a long list of sustainable decisions that have been incorporated into this project. The building will be fully PV ready and extremely high performance building envelope. And in terms of the placement, again, the view from Otis Street, the experience for employees from a wellness perspective, and for the community has been really paramount here. We've put a lot of focus into the landscape design at the building entry along Otis Street, and also a lot of focus on elements such as the site lighting design to make sure that the experience is going to be really positive for the community. So with that, Will is going to take us through the details of the site plan.
Could I pause you for 1 second here? In my excitement to get to this, I neglected to read the public notice into the record, which is a requirement on all public hearings. So bear with me while I read that into the record. Notice of public hearing, Planning Board, Town of Westborough. The Planning Board hereby gives notice that it will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, September 21st, 2021, starting at or after 6:30 p.m. in the Great Hall, second floor of the Forbes Municipal Building, 45 West Main Street, Westborough, Massachusetts, to consider the site plan review and special permit applications of Atlantic Otis Realty LLC, care of Atlantic Management Corporation, to develop the property with a new 170,000 plus or minus square foot building with integrated surface parking, loading facilities, and on-site infrastructure improvements for a same-day e-commerce fulfillment center at the property located at 60 and 64 Otis Street, Westborough, Mass. Said properties are located in the General Industrial IB zoning district, with a small portion of 64 Otis Street located in the Highway Business BA zoning district, as shown on the Assessor's Map 25, parcels 3 and 3A. A copy of the application and plan are available for review in the Westborough Planning Board offices at 45 West Street, Westborough, Mass. On the Planning Board webpage at https://www.town.westborough.ma.us/planning, and the town clerk's office at 34 West Main Street, Westborough, Massachusetts, during regular business hours. And that is signed by the Westborough Planning Board, and that was in the Telegram and Gazette on, pardon my, Kristen, do I have the dates? Bob, do you know the dates?
Offhand, I don't. I think we delivered the tear sheets as well as the green cards.
All right, bear with us while we get the dates.
Sorry?
Okay, so that was in the Telegram and Gazette on September 3rd and September 10th. Back to you, sorry.
Thank you. As Brian mentioned, my name is Will Park, civil engineer at SMMA. So I think after Bob Michaud's introduction, we're familiar with the site and its orientation. We have the 170,000 square foot building here with the Otis Street to the east running north and south. As you can see, as Brian mentioned, we took great consideration of the siting of this building. There are really pristine natural resources in the center of the site and along the southern edge of the property. Anyone who's driven by the site recently sees some activity. There's some remediation of lead-contaminated soils where I'm highlighting here. And any day now, there's going to be a 1-on-5 wetland replication area project happening here. In addition to the siting, we considered the natural resources associated with these buffers. And not only are we not disturbing any resource areas with this project, the proposed development stays out of the 100-foot wetland buffers, with the exception of the demolition of the buildings and pavement on the 60 Otis property. There is a portion of those that does creep into the outer fringes of the 100-foot wetland buffer. Sorry. Got it. Here's an enlarged version of the illustrative site plan. We have 2 curb cuts proposed off Otis Street. The northern one is the commercial truck access drive. Truck traffic will enter the site along an access drive dedicated to truck traffic, where there are 8 loading docks and 2 trash compactor docks in the rear of the site. The southern curb cut is dedicated to civilians. When you enter the site, to the right, you can enter to the building entrance, and then the staff parking area has approximately 163 parking spaces. From that civilian entrance, you can continue to the contractor courier parking, where they will receive packages in and out of the building through several overhead doors here. One reason for the 2 curb cuts is the tenant's requirements for safety and separation of the commercial truck traffic from the civilian vehicles, which is why we're proposing both 2 curb cuts off Otis Street. Also, these vehicles will not be able to circulate around the site, despite us providing 360-degree access for emergency vehicles. There will be a barrier gate here and here to prevent trucks from coming around and commingling with the civilian traffic and vice versa. Here's the layout materials plan that was submitted. Really doesn't show much that wasn't on the previous enlargement. Has the zoning table, parking table, and the wayfinding signage and all the signage required by the tenant for vehicular and pedestrian safety. This is, apologies for the graphics, this is our grading and utilities plan. The project emphasizes trying to consolidate all of the utilities into a main utility corridor along the north side of the building and the commercial truck access drive. We've tried to limit the curb cut or the trench openings into Otis Street and think that the only one that may be required is a small connection here for the sewer and a connection across Otis Street to the primary overhead utility poles on the east side of Otis Street. The building will have 2 sewer services, one out the east facade and one off the north facade, combining in one sewer main and connecting to a sewer manhole out in Otis Street. We're proposing a single water connection here, which will loop around the building. We have fire hydrants located at each quadrant of the building with good access from emergency vehicles from the internal circulation. After meeting internally with the DPW, they requested several isolation gate valves around that loop if there were ever repairs needed. The building and fire protection could still function while that section is being maintained. Off the west side of the project, beyond where the water main loops, and then down in this insert here, the DPW requested an extension of our water service, which would essentially act as a supporting the town's water main grid, which will, it's hard to see here, but it terminates at our property, and the intent is to connect it to the apartment buildings to the northwest of our project. They currently have a dead-end water main that has occasional issues. So the applicant is in discussions with that owner, and it's subject to various easements and cost sharings, but those conversations are in progress. The stormwater design for the project takes advantage of the fantastic underlying soils in the property, sandy gravels and gravelly sands. So what you see here is a series of infiltration basins, surface infiltration basins. The infiltration basin number 3 in front here, mainly as a result of the pre and post development peak flow attenuation, because this was just a field with no impervious contributing to it. In its current situation, we had to the existing peak flows was essentially 0. So we had to attenuate almost all of the proposed development. So as a result of that peak flow attenuation, the infiltration here infiltrates the 2-year storm before and below any outlets out of the system. The infiltration basin number 2 also infiltrates up to the 2-year storm, and the basin number 3 in the rear, the largest one that receives the clean rooftop runoff, actually infiltrates the 100-year storm before utilizing the emergency spillway, which I don't think I've ever heard of. Because it's all infiltrating and we are close to a town water supply, all contributing runoff to these infiltration basins will either be clean rooftop runoff or adequately pre-treated to the 1-year storm with pre-treatment stormwater devices as the last structure prior to discharge into the basins. The discharges out of the basins were very intentionally placed based on the existing topography and uses of the site. There's an existing swale or cart path here where our emergency spillway connects to. There's some, you can barely see it here, but there's actually a swale here. Similarly, the outlet control structure of this basin cuts over here to an existing cart path and kind of a natural path for it to get down to its final destination down at the wetland. Again, we wanted to avoid the shortcut of discharging directly south. That's the 100-foot buffer, by the way, that line that kind of snakes along this. Discharging it directly south would introduce a point source to the top of that very steep slope, which would most likely lead to erosion issues. So we thought it would be much more prudent to discharge to the west, where there's already an existing swale. Finally, infiltration basin number 1. Due to the topography, it was challenging to find a place for that outlet to go. We wanted to avoid another trench across Otis Street connecting to those structures. So we are connecting to an existing drainage manhole here that discharges to this surface water. Again, the result of all of this is minimizing the utility connections in Otis Street to one electrical duct bank here and a very small trench that doesn't even go the half of the first travel lane for sewer to the north. I believe that summarizes the site design and utility design and stormwater design. Any questions before I pass it back to Mr. Michaud?
One quick question. I know in the corridor study it said to, it asked about putting in conduit for future lights. So is that included in here?
I believe we are installing the infrastructure to be ready to install signalized intersection in the future.
So the corridor study's still in a draft form?
Correct.
Okay. All right, why don't we move on? I have, unless somebody has specific comments on, is there anything else?
Bob was going to speak to the actual traffic load from the site.
Okay, great. Let's discuss that, because I have questions on that.
Yes, thank you. So the quarter study is in the throes of being finalized this week. The quarter study has benefited by departmental input. We've been meeting with various department personnel as late as last week to review some of the findings of that study, and the intention is to finalize that this week. We didn't see that there were any material modifications to the plan that I've just presented to you that would be an outcome of any input received to date through that process, but it is currently technically in a draft form. The traffic study, which has been submitted as part of the application materials, really builds on the same traffic volume conditions, the pre-pandemic traffic volume conditions that were inventoried both for the 50 Otis Street property and that became the basis of the quarter study that will be finalized this week. In this instance, we follow industry standards in looking out 7 years. We look at a 7-year growth horizon to determine the incremental impact of likely development within that timeline, including development of this particular property. And ultimately, that would lead to recommendations and infrastructure that would be consistent with the long-term recommendations of the quarter study itself, which I just outlined. I will say that this particular proposal, to understand its traffic impact, is very important to understand that this is known as a mini fulfillment center. It's a 170,000 square foot building, half of which will actually be roboticized for product order processing. Right? So there'll be a high level of mechanization, if you will, within the building that will provide a certain level of efficiency. Second very important thing to understand is that unlike a traditional industrial use or fulfillment center, this will actually rely on contract type civilian deliveries, right? So there will be limited employment at this center as a result. The projected employment level for this building is 260 employees over all shifts, with the largest shift being no more than 130 employees. That's about 4 times lower than a typical fulfillment type center project. And the building size itself at 170,000 square feet also reflects the use of the robotics and the unique way in which they're going to contract delivery services out of this particular facility. So this is likely to have a traffic impact that is substantially below what a typical fulfillment center would have. And I'll speak to what those estimates are in a moment. The study looks at the same gateways as the quarter study, the Route 9 intersection at Otis Street to the north, the Fisher Street intersection to the south, the Smith Valve Parkway signalized location, as well as the site itself and its relationship to the RK Plaza driveway across the street. If we look at typical industrial standard for a parcel hub, which is the closest land use category that would be published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers as a starting point to understand traffic, we've looked at the likely trip estimates using that land use category and compared it directly to the tenant-provided empirical information for mini fulfillment centers that it operates throughout the country. And we find that there's a very high level of correlation between the two. The total number of trips that would be generated or estimated to be generated by this 170,000 square foot building using ITE land use code 156, which is the parcel hub type use, correlates almost exactly to the empirical data with one difference, and that is the directional distribution of trips is slightly different. And that's a function of how this particular site will be programmed using civilian labor rather than permanent employee labor. So an example of that, unlike a last mile facility where employees would actually arrive to a facility, load a vehicle, take the vehicle out, return, get into their car and leave again, this facility will contract civilians to work in essentially 4-hour shifts. You can sign up online, so to speak, to get a 4-hour shift. You would arrive as a non-employee, a civilian, with a defined route, 4-hour shift, anywhere between, starting at 3 in the morning till about 8 at night. There would be multiple slots that you can select from that you'd be able to sign up for. So once you were assigned that route, you would go to the facility where a container would be waiting for you. You would load that into your vehicle, most likely a passenger vehicle rather than a van, and you would leave for about a 4-hour period of time and then return. You wouldn't actually be obligated to return to the facility once your 4-hour shift is done. So if all of you've done is signed up for a 4-hour shift, you want to go home after your last package is delivered, you can do that. So that characteristic essentially shifts the distribution pattern slightly from a traditional last mile type facility or fulfillment facility. And as a result, what we're showing here for trip generation shows about 70 peak directional trips per hour during a typical peak hour between the hours of 7 and 9 in the morning. That's a typical commuter period, with about the same number of vehicles leaving, right? So that 70 inbound vehicles that you see in that estimate would comprise employees who are going to the facility for the day, for a much longer shift and parking in the front field, versus a civilian trip that would be going to the so-called courier area to pick up their packages for delivery. And so the 69 outbound trips would reflect the proportion of prior shift employees that would be leaving the facility, plus those civilian drivers that would be leaving for their 4-hour shift. So there's a fairly balanced trip generation happening here, about a vehicle a minute coming in and a vehicle a minute leaving during those hours. It's not a very large number, but it's a very consistent number. Truck trips over that same period of time, based on tenant-provided information, it will only be about 1 truck to 2 trucks per hour. The industry standards show something higher, and we've used the industry standard as the basis of impact assessment for this project. So what we're showing is truck generation of between 7 and 8 trips per hour, which is a very conservative assumption for analysis purposes. When we look at the evening peak hour, we see a very similar 69 vehicle trips coming into the facility, again comprising employees coming in for an evening shift, combined with those civilians that have signed up for another 4-hour shift. And you'll see 30 exiting, which is principally the civilian drivers that are leaving to make a delivery during that time period. So a slightly lower level of activity during evening peak hours. So the total number of trips that we're talking about here represents about 1 vehicle a minute coming in or leaving the facility on average during these peak hours. On a daily basis, about just under 1,700 vehicle trips total are being estimated. If you look at industry standards, we're highly consistent with that standard. The empirical tenant-provided data shows the same result, about 1,700 vehicle trips per day. How that compares to the quarter study is important to understand. So in blue in this column are the numbers that I've just described, and you'll see that in the context of the quarter study, we've looked at 2 scenarios, the moderate growth scenario, which is really based on what the master plan update assumptions were for parcel development in this area. And then we've looked at a high growth scenario, which would assume the highest best potential employment levels for specific parcels along the quarter. And just to give you a sense of what that is, the quarter study for moderate growth for the 60 to 64 parcel was 260 employees. That was the assumption, using an industrial land use category. The high growth scenario was 650 employees, And we basically proportioned that to the highest potential employment levels that would be occurring at 50 Otis Street, simply extrapolating that over to this particular site. Very conservative estimate. So that's what's shown in the rightmost column. The story here is that we're highly consistent with the moderate growth assumptions. We're within a couple of vehicles, actually, during the weekday evening peak hours, and only about 40 vehicles different than what was presented in the quarter study. We're substantially lower than the high growth assumptions, about 100 to 150 trips lower during typical peak hours relative to the assumptions of the quarter study. And recall that those high growth numbers serve as the basis for the infrastructure improvements that we've identified in the color renderings previously. So that provides an appropriate envelope, if you will, really a long range master plan for how to accommodate these types of developments along the quarter. Snapshot in graphical form would show that that 70 inbound versus 70 outbound trips per hour when distributed on the area roadways, beginning with Route 9 to the top of the screen, east and west, would result in no more than about one additional vehicle trip per minute to or from the west, about one vehicle every couple of minutes to or from the east. Fisher Street would sustain an impact of about one additional vehicle trip every 2 minutes. So these are relatively modest numbers. Similar results, but lower in the weekday evening peak hours. So if you look at Route 9 to the west, rather than there being 70 trips per hour, it's 50, and only less than 30 per hour east on Route 9. Operationally, what that shows is that the existing infrastructure in the area, whether it's the signal at Route 9 at Otis Street or the signal at Smith Valley Parkway, on a letter grade rating, will operate and will continue to operate at level of service D or better, an acceptable urban standard for operation. It doesn't mean that things can't be made to work better through signal retiming, for instance, but there's certainly ample capacity to accommodate the types of increases that I just presented, as well as other area background growth, 50 Otis Street, 66 Otis Street next door, and general area background growth. The only real delays that we've identified through that assessment would relate to the Speedway Plaza driveway itself and making a left turn from that Plaza driveway during peak hours, principally, and you'll have longer delays there as you would today, actually. So we're not materially affecting that, but that is one location. It's the side street driveway delay. The mainline traffic flow on Otis Street is unconstrained. As we turn our attention to site access, I'll reinforce what Will had mentioned, and that is the quarter study began with the notion that we'd want to relocate the RK Plaza driveway, which is shown here in the upper portion in dashed format. That is feasible within the confines of the property that exists on that side of the road. That was the driving factor in identifying an appropriate location for primary driveway access for the parcel across the street at 60 to 64. That's why that driveway is located where it is. It's being driven by the desire to shift what would be a future signalized location as far south of the Route 9 corridor as possible, and to provide sufficient spacing from that signal to the target driveway so that you could properly coordinate the operation of those signals and conduct queue management between them. As we focus on the commercial truck driveway, it's important in the context of industrial development in the modern era. Most, if not all, modern facilities are making it a policy to physically separate vehicles, passenger vehicles, employee vehicles, and civilian vehicles from commercial trucking activity. And that's what this plan does. The only real viable location for that commercial truck driveway to occur would be to the north of the primary driveway, which is where it's located. And it's designed in a way that would allow for a WB67 vehicle to be able to maneuver into it and out of it without encroachment to adjoining property or travel lanes. And that's why the specific dimension is shown the way that it is. You'll also see the context of the Bewalt Trail. the shared use path along the frontage. It's shown in a green format here. This is the exact alignment that is derived from the long-range quarter study plan. It shows essentially a 15-foot offset of the property line from its current position along the site frontage into the property, and the introduction of a 10-foot wide paved pathway separated by a 2-foot grass strip from the edge of the road, and the roadway itself would then have a 2-foot marked shoulder and an 11-foot travel lane in this particular area. The commitment by this particular applicant is to construct the infrastructure along its frontage, as well as the adjoining property that it controls at 54, to provide that 10-foot multi-use path, shared use pathway as built infrastructure, consistent with the recommendations of the long-range plan. As we focus on other parcels, you'll see, as we look at 66 immediately to the left or north in this diagram, you see the potential alignment also shown there, so that the planning for that site can also take that potential alignment into account. Transportation recommendations, we've discussed the access improvements, all very consistent with the recommendations of the long-range, high-growth scenario recommendations of the quarter study. The provision of the separate commercial vehicle driveway, which is a tenant-driven need. The accommodation for the future signalization and relocation of the RK Plaza driveway, and I'm pleased to report that the applicant has continued its conversations with that landowner to garner its support so that could happen along with this plan. And finally, the construction of the multi-use path along its frontage, including 54 Otis Street. Road safety audit improvements are also proposed, although those are formal commitments of the 50 Otis Street project. They're actually written into the conditions. There are very specific near-term safety-based recommendations in the RSA that, if not implemented and for whatever reason for 50 Otis, would then become the responsibility of this particular property to effect. In addition, through ongoing conversations with the town, we understand the importance of retaining or maintaining a commercial quarter of Otis Street without it necessarily bleeding that activity into other more residential areas of the community. We've heard concern about commercial truck activity along Fisher Street in particular, not necessarily related to any specific parcel on this quarter, but nonetheless, this applicant has committed and is undertaking a heavy commercial vehicle exclusion study of the Fisher Street quarter, given that stated concern by the community. We expect that the findings of that HCVE will be ready in the next 2 to 3 week period, and would provide the potential basis for petition by the Board of Selectmen to Mass DOT for a heavy commercial vehicle exclusion along Fisher Street between Route 135 and Otis Street, should the applicable criteria be met. And finally, transportation demand management programming is another component of this project. Consistent with the provisions of the master plan update, there will be bicycle accommodation features within this site. There will be sidewalk connections from the building to the multi-use path that I've described in the front, and other incentives that would be brought to bear, including things like transit pass subsidies that would allow employees of this facility to have transportation options and incentives, particularly given its proximity to the MBTA station, which is just a very short walk away and certainly a very short bike ride away. So there are a series of TDM-related elements that are outlined in more detail in the traffic study. Last but not least, and I'll let Bob elaborate on this, we are now in the enviable position of having a fairly comprehensive master plan for the quarter that grant monies could be sought for implementation. And this applicant is committed to working jointly with the community to advance grant requests, which they're currently exploring. And I'll let Bob elaborate on that.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just in closing make a comment on that. I do a lot of speaking on zoning at various panels across the Commonwealth, and I always say that good planning is 15 to 20 years in horizons. It takes 15 to 20 years to implement good, thoughtful planning. Everyone wants it like that, but it takes that long. I think it was about 15 years ago, Jim, we worked on the rail transit, which is probably one of the best examples in the suburbs. We had the residential across from the rail station. This is the culmination of now enhancing that with commercial. You couple that with the fact that, without getting into discussions how much or what the political scenario is, there's a high likelihood in the next 6 months there's going to be substantial infrastructure money available. So you have, and I think I said this before the select board last week when we talked in general terms, you've touched all the bases here. You have a rail transit program in place, both residential and commercial. We've put in place a master plan from a corridor study standpoint that shows, for lack of a term, a roadmap to infrastructure improvements, which is a dynamic document that will change over time. And we have the infrastructure and money available. We would be, everything's ready. I hate the expression shovel ready, but everything is ready. We have a commercial project that is ready. So we're talking to Jim and the development team. We think it is prudent that we would commit to hire a consultant to prepare the necessary grant applications. And I don't want to mention the person's name because we're still negotiating, but a well-known individual that has been very successful in the region getting substantial grant money so that a lot of what we saw on the corridor plan may be done sooner rather than later. And it's an opportunity to really step to the plate and make it happen. And that would be a commitment that we would undertake. So with that, I'll turn it over to any questions.
Jim, I know we have have to approve the engineering peer review. Should we deal with that first?
We can sorry.
Why don't we turn to questions? We can take.
Yeah, you can deal with that at any time.
Questions from the board. Who wants to start? Anybody? Because I have a lot of questions, but.
A lot, but you could
No, go ahead. I want to see who covers my questions, so I don't have to.
probably have just a small question about the assumptions made with contractors coming and going in passenger vehicles. How do you, or what assumptions do you make about how they'll disperse from the property, when they're exiting with their loads? And I'm, particularly asking, I saw the notion of a commercial vehicle study for Fisher Street, but if the load's coming from contractors and personal vehicles, then that's not going to help the residences, the residential character of the bordering properties to the south.
Yeah, the distribution of carrier trips or civilian trips is the question, right? And if we look at several sources of information, one is regional population densities, which would be an indicator as to where the likely density of routes would be oriented. They're actually oriented toward the Route 9 corridor as the primary means of getting to a more regional location. They're not so much focused on local destination routes that would be well served or more direct using Fisher Street. We do have some trips assigned to Fisher Street, though. There are some 28 vehicle trips per hour that we expect, one vehicle every couple of minutes, none of which we expect would be heavy commercial vehicles, right? The tenant has in its model distribution occurring to this facility from other regional sortation facilities or hubs to bring product here that would then be sorted within this facility and palletized and put into shipment boxes, if you will, based on e-commerce orders. So the trucks are all going to be oriented to Route 9. Carrier vehicles, passenger vehicles will be principally oriented to Route 9 based on employment density and likely routes. But we do have some trip assignment to Fisher Street as a reality. There are some there is some population density that you could serve using Fisher Street to 135, for instance. So that's where that 30 trips is coming from. It's a very manageable number, one vehicle every 2 minutes. They are passenger cars, not heavy commercial vehicles. There's more than ample capacity to accommodate that. And the assumptions that would apply to this property are well below the assumptions of other by right development that could occur here. Yeah.
Chairman, if I also may add that, as on other projects, that it's always worthwhile to have a look back to a period of time after stabilization to say, do the numbers hold? And if they don't, what strategies can be employed to correct any actions? And there are things you can do.
I think that's important, especially with Gibbons School right there. You know, you're going to have, early in the morning, you're going to have traffic going into the school, and at 2 or 3, you're going to have traffic coming out with added trips going on Fisher. We don't want to have the school buses backed up or to that extent. And also, I'd be interested in seeing how the traffic would be down from Fisher to Milk. When you get down to Milk, there's usually a backup there. So if we're adding more traffic down Fisher, I think it's important to evaluate that intersection as well.
I'll play off of what Bob said, and that is in the 50 Otis Street example, there is a monitoring or look back period, and that could certainly be something that is incorporated as part of this project to include locations like Milk Street, as you mentioned. I think the monitoring would certainly look at the Fisher Street intersection to see how specifically the distribution of trips is working and impacting from that gateway. And then from there, there would be, a consideration if it's a substantial number as to whether or not that has a negative effect on Milk Street, for instance.
You can do things like license plate tracking and things of that nature. Okay. To see which vehicles, if they're coming and going, and track them.
Right, and an example of an outcome through monitoring would be providing route instructions to the contracted entity to actually direct them to Route 9. So that's an example of what an outcome could be from a monitoring provision. So to the extent Fisher Street sustained a greater than 28 vehicle trip impact per hour, and that was specifically associated with this property, the mitigating, or the countermeasure, if you will, would be the provision of a written route form that would direct those vehicles to use Route 9 as the departing or arriving route.
Yeah, I think that would be important during school hours for sure, to avoid traffic there.
If I could, I think that's key. I think that's key, Bob. Having your drivers not choose to go over, say, Fisher Street or Smith Parkway, to go Gleason Street or Arch Street, because it's an easy cut through to Shrewsbury or to Grafton, I think is important, because there's other ways to get to Shrewsbury or Grafton. If your driver goes to, say, needs to go to Route 20 in Shrewsbury, they may choose to go over Smith Parkway to Gleason Street to Walnut Street, whereas because they want to avoid the problem that's at Route 9 and Otis Street Signal. But if they're directed that they must go there, that relieves major trips from those roadways. And that's the same for Fisher Street, Arch Street, all of those streets that could serve as alternate cut-through routes during peak hour.
Except for local deliveries.
I'm sorry?
Except that there's a delivery that is...
Clearly. If they're delivering to Fisher Street, obviously they have to get on Fisher Street. Yeah.
Any more questions, Tim?
I'll just have one more. The discussions, it's hard to ask the applicant of discussions with the abutter at the Arcade Plaza. I guess I'm wondering if that reconfiguration is just an entrance to that property?
Yeah.
Show that.
Yeah, I'll show that again.
Or, there's no discussion of an easement. I could envision that a loop road around the back there would relieve traffic at the Otis Street, Route 9 corridor, for anybody traveling eastbound, proceeding across the intersection behind the plaza and entering Route 9. But I think I'm envisaging something that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think what we were pleased to discover is that RK has a substantial amount of land opposite the property here that would allow for what is probably about a 200-foot southbound shift of the driveway. That driveway is a single lane in, single lane out today. The concept here is that it would be relocated and enlarged to allow for separate left and right turn lanes, and that it would, of course, have the inbound lane as well, but that alignment would be directly opposite the primary driveway, and it could be signalized.
Signalized.
Yeah. And I know that Joe Zink is here for Atlantic, has had ongoing conversations with RK about this, and I believe that there's, why wouldn't there be a strong level of support for what's being shown here, because there's a direct benefit principally to the plaza. This property doesn't need a signal to function properly. This driveway doesn't have substantial volume or queuing absent a signal, but the Arcade Plaza over time will. So that would greatly facilitate, I mean, that's a huge advantage for that plaza. And it also happens to coincide with one of the recommended potential routes for BWALT. One of the potential routes for the BWALT trail system is along the alignment that we're showing, the relocated Arcade Plaza. So there's a few things that kind of fell into place there. The ability to implement that, of course, will depend on, acquiring rights to do what's shown in that plan, and that's part of what's.
All right, that helps.
Yeah.
Just the nature of those discussions. For me right now.
Further questions? So let's start with that light. I completely agree with the need for that light and the realignment of the RK driveway. I'm just curious who's going to build that light and where that, is the applicant proposing to put that light in now, or is that a future improvement?
The concept right now is that the relocation would be effected as soon as possible for RK Plaza, right? The ability to function, for the site to function, is not dependent on the relocation of RK Plaza. But it makes sense to do that in the near term for the following reason, that we would want to build the subsurface infrastructure that would facilitate signalization when it becomes warranted. Underground conduit, right? So while you're building the driveway for this property, you'd want a trench to provide all of the underground conduit infrastructure necessary so you can plug into it at the end of the day. To the extent RK grants rights to relocate the driveway, that would be the subject of a specific agreement between this applicant and that landowner. I wouldn't pretend to know or presume who would be paying for what in that regard, but the concept is shown. Whether that gets funded partly by RK, recognizing that there's an inherent benefit to their operation, remains to be seen. The signal itself would only be triggered or warranted as a function of the traffic from RK Plaza, not this property. There isn't sufficient volume from our driveway to actually meet a signal warrant, but there is for the RK Plaza. So as an example, there are some 90 left turns that happen per hour out of RK Plaza. Technically, given the volume on Otis Street, you'd be close to or maybe over 1 hour volume warrant.
All right, so let's start with that premise that the site as designed will function well. You've got passenger vehicles entering and exiting from the southern portion, and presumably we want them all to go up to Route 9, so they'll be taking a left out of the site. Any gap in the road, in the current traffic, will be filled by those passenger vehicles. So your trucks that are coming out of the northern exit will have few, if any, gaps, particularly at peak hours. On top of that, all the businesses, Target, the gymnastics, the Moe's, who already have zero to negligible exiting gaps, will have even fewer opportunities. Without a light, somebody could not turn right and double back. They'd have to turn left into RK probably to get out to Route 9.
Well, actually, the queues that happen today from Route 9 actually do regularly influence the Target driveway. It's just simply too close to Route 9, right? So it's very difficult to make a left turn there. If you do, you might even get caught on Otis Street and block the ability for southbound traffic. There is a way to address that, and the RSA identified it, and that is you could rephase the signal. You'd restripe the northbound approach to Otis Street, which is a single left turn lane today and a single through lane and a single right lane. There is sufficient right-of-way on Route 9 to reconfigure the left and the through to a left and a through left. So you'd actually have essentially dual left, but you'd have to retime or rephase the signal so that that was on its own phase. Right now, if you're on Otis Street, north and south, you go at the same time. That's a problem because there's so much real estate in the middle of that intersection that people get confused and they get stuck, and there are accidents that happen as a result. So one of the outcomes of the RSA is rephase the signal. It doesn't require roadway widening. It does require placing an additional head on the signal and reprogramming the signal and restriping, but that is a way to reduce the queuing that currently occurs on Otis Street. That would more than offset any impact that this particular project has on the Otis Street corridor, as you had mentioned, right? The gaps, right? Absorbing the gaps that are there. I will point out that the volumes at the Target driveway in the morning are not the issue. They're an afternoon issue. Target's not all that busy in the morning. And this site in the afternoon is only generating 30 cars an hour during its highest activity period. So we don't believe that there would be a material impact from this property to how traffic currently functions on Otis Street. As it relates to the commercial driveway, the tenant provided information shows that there's actually about one truck an hour either coming into or leaving the facility. There are many hours when there aren't any. And while our analysis says 7 or 8, that's a cumulative number. We put that in just for level of service purposes. The amount of trucks coming out of here will not be impacted by the amount of volume that's coming out of the primary driveway there. It's just simply not a high enough volume for it to be a problem. I don't disagree that the signal would be a benefit. I do believe that it would be warranted in the nearer term. I don't think it's something that is 5 years out. I think it's something that's more like a year out or 2. To the extent it was funded and built, that's where you'd want it to be built. We mentioned the grant application process, so the concept would be building the infrastructure to support this property in a way that's consistent with the long-term plan and to pursue grant monies for those infrastructure components that exist beyond the frontage of the property. It could include a signal at Target, could include the signal here, it could include the extension of the B-Wall Trail, the widening of the northerly end of Otis Street, et cetera. All of that would be the subject of the grant money. The master plan concept is a $7.7 million concept. That includes everything, engineering, construction, the B-Wall, everything that you saw in that color plan. That's a $7.7 million project. So the grant application would target that, or a substantial amount of that value. So anything that wasn't built day one for this project would be subject to the grant and built as part of the grant money.
That would be the intent, that we're going to, everything is ready to go, and we would be hopefully near the top of the line in terms of infrastructure improvements.
So can I explore this a little bit further? So I understand your premise is that in the short term to moderate growth period, the demand for a light may not be urgent. But I don't understand a northern exit from this site for trucks that is not tied into a light in some way. I understand your long-term proposal would be to relocate the Target driveway further south to have a shared exit with 66, which I don't even know if that's in their plans. We'll hear that next. But I don't understand why we wouldn't have some type of interconnectivity between this site, at least proposed, so that those trucks could use that future signal that you say will be necessary in the high growth period. If you understand what I'm saying, I don't necessarily know if those trucks will need a signal to get out right away, but you're foreseeing another signal, I think maybe we should consider tying all of these abutters into that future signal as well.
Right. For this particular project, given the lack of intensity of commercial activity, there wouldn't be an urgent need to have to control those movements with the signal. There are plenty of gaps available on Otis Street. We're far enough from the Route 9 corridor for that to be the case. But I agree that to the extent you can cross-connect driveways for the benefit of having signalized access, that's a good thing, and you should achieve that as an objective. The way that this particular site laid out, and the one adjacent to it, suggested that the appropriate consolidated locations would start with Target and shifting that driveway. It's actually shown in this diagram up in the on the wall here. You can see the existing alignment of Target opposite Herb Chambers building. We would suggest that optimally you would shift that further south by probably about 100 feet so that it ran along the property line of 66. That's the farthest you can go without having to secure right of access from the 66 property. That would allow the alignment to match up with one of the existing driveways behind the Herb Chambers building, just as a practical matter. And in the context of the 66 property site plan, which we have the benefit of having incorporated into the master plan concept, actually allows a fairly direct connection to that property. You see here in the lower corner of their parking field. So there would be an inherent, what's not shown in here is maybe it's on the prior diagram.
So I still can't envision a scenario where we have two lights.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how far those are apart.
They're about 700 feet apart, roughly 800 feet.
So, and smack dab in the middle, you've got an exit for commercial trucks.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't seem to be a functional. I just don't understand how that's going to function when that eventuality occurs.
Well, the timing on
I
those-
would assume that the trucks would come out to one of those two signals, whether it be through some type of interconnectivity with 66 and the Target driveway, or, again, I don't know what the solution is, but I can't imagine where we have two lights and a driveway in the middle.
Well, if we look at other driveways in the context of these two signals, if you go a little further south, there's another commercial driveway shown there. That's a driveway that I recall generates about 10 or 15 vehicle trips per hour, mainly trucks. It's a fairly narrow driveway, but we've specifically located the signal for Arcade Plaza / primary driveway so that the queues that result from that do not influence the ability to get into or out of that driveway. In other words, the 95th percentile queues under high growth assumptions don't extend anywhere past that driveway. And likewise, the commercial driveway that's shown here for 6064 also is not influenced by the 95th percentile queues that result from the queues that would result from the signal. So it's a managed process for sure. It's just another driveway, and in fact, it's probably going to be among the lowest volume driveways in the entire quarter. So it's not a location that would suffer an impact because of the signals, and vice versa. The signals would work quite efficiently even with it in place.
Okay, so, Jim, go ahead and comment.
One comment on that, I know for safety, you have the trucks coming and going from that commercial driveway.
Right.
But you are creating a loop around for safety vehicles. If it turned out that was a recurring problem, could you allow the trucks only to exit around and come out to the light to exit? Still come into that driveway, but possibly, if it's a truck or two an hour, is that much risk to the civilian traffic?
I think
in the future, you could come out to the light and go left in the trucks if it turned out to be a problem.
Sure. I think one of the outcomes of a monitoring process is to measure performance, and that would include the actual effect of truck activity in the commercial driveway between the signals. It is physically possible to do what you're saying. The tenant, and this is a very specific tenant-driven safety issue, has it designed this way for a purpose, but it
There's
is
safety
physical.
issues coming on and how, that's an alternative safety
Yeah.
issue potentially that would overweigh the other. I'm just saying it's a
I
possibility.
agree.
If that turned out to be of a problem than the risk here.
But Mr. Chairman, could I ask a question? Sure. You could also adjust the timing of those lights so that you have a natural break. The trucks would be stacking on our site, so it's not as if they're congesting the roadway. You could create a natural break for a truck to exit safely by creating a gap, right?
Well, the signals would naturally do that, as it's shown on the design now. What you're suggesting is to actually signalize the commercial driveway.
No, just the two lights, the timing would, I understand naturally, but you can adjust the timing to adjust that natural that gap.
Allow green at the southern light briefly to free that up before you allow green at the northern light.
Okay, so I guess my next question would be, are we doing any kind of traffic peer review on this project?
They are the peer review.
Okay. They're the peer reviewer?
They're the peer review in the quarter study. They're the independent review for the quarter study, but they're the primary review for the traffic study for this plan. If you want a peer review for the traffic, that would have to be something you requested.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I understand that MDN did the corridor study, but they also were hired by the applicant to do the traffic
That's
study
correct.
for 64 Otis. There were a lot of presumptions there about facilities and trip generations and so on. Not questioning those because they're way beyond the scope of my expertise, which is why we typically do a peer review on these to assert the facts and see if there's anything you missed, which hopefully you didn't.
Oh, no, I understand. You know, we do a lot of peer review. So.
I guess my preference would be that we have a peer review of the traffic study on 64 Otis, because I want to make sure that we're dotting all the i's and crossing all the t's. And I don't know how the rest of the board feels about that. But before I get into that, one of the things that's come up several times in discussions has been access to the target ball fields. The selectmen brought that up. Presumably, you don't want people using the commercial truck access entrance. I'm just wondering, is there a way to accommodate that request in this design?
I don't know if in the design, we can look at and see if there are alternatives along the corridor that would enhance access. I think we'd be willing to look at that.
Because currently the access is pretty disappointing behind Target if you've been back there. And we don't have any access to the rear of the park building. Your site abuts both of those sites, and I think some type of fire, at least, or safety vehicle access to the rear of the park building would benefit the town, as well as better access and possibly more parking, if that's available, for the target ball fields. And I think that's, again, something that has come up several times. Okay. Again, I don't want to get too into the traffic, because I think it would be beneficial to get a peer review and see if that uncovers some things that are, again, a little beyond my expertise.
If that's something the board wants, please make that clear, because I have to go out and get a proposal for that.
Well, that's something I would like. How does the rest of the board feel?
I agree. I think it's an important thing. I mean, I'm sitting and looking at this, and I really have to think about it, because I'm extremely concerned about how this is actually going to work. We've got a number of things that have brought up, which are things in negotiation. So, we're very much up in the air on this. I'm concerned about the fact that, in order to make this work, a number of things are going to have to be moved, and a number of easements or agreements with other landowners are going to have to be done in order to come out with the plan that they have come up with at this point. And so I think that's a concern of mine, only because it's up in the air. I mean, I see the plan before me. Whether or not that's going to work, I'd like to see peer review. But at the same time, it involves a lot of moving pieces. And I just would like to know, I guess, I'd like to have a little more satisfaction or feeling of confidence that these other plans are actually going to work where they are and what we're looking at as far as timing goes on them.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, other than the relocation of the RKA Plaza driveway, all of the other, the multi-path, all that is doable within the right-of-way, right?
That's right. This application does not in any way depend on securing easements or rights from any other entity than the applicant themselves. While we're showing the relocation of the RK Plaza driveway, and we would like to see that happen at some point in the near future, ideally to coincide with the construction of the primary driveway, it's not an element that you need to have in place for this to be a functional, safe site and to meet applicable safety and operational standards. It's short for saying you can build the driveway where we're showing it on this plan without changing the RK Plaza alignment. It will work fine. It will have ample capacity. It will not create a queuing effect or negative influence on Otis Street. But it would be better to have the relocation happen in the near future. So it's.
I guess my question on that, Bob, is what is the trigger point? Because you're saying it'll be safe now, but at some point that breaking point is reached, and part of the traffic that's going through that new signal and through the Otis Street, Route 9 intersection into all these other neighborhoods, part of that traffic is going to be from this site, right? It's not going to be the last, it's not going to all be the responsibility of the last person to build here, right? So I just don't understand why there's not, part of the solution is the responsibility of this applicant.
Well, I think what we're saying is that this applicant has made pretty significant strides toward first identifying a long-term infrastructure that would be needed to support much more development than is being contemplated right now, right? This is a plan, the master plan is based on a high-growth scenario that assumes the development of more than a dozen specific parcels in and around the Otis Street corridor, and uses extraordinarily high conservative assumptions for employment levels for specific properties, including 60 to 64. This is based on the 650.
This plan that, whether or not it was volunteered by Atlantic, was a requirement of the
50. Correct.
It's not a requirement of 64, right? So what's the next step in planning for the future for that corridor, right? Like, and what responsibility does this applicant have towards planning towards that future?
Right.
And, I just don't understand how, at some point, we're going to need the light. We're going to need 2 lights, if you're correct, right? And who's going to pay for that? The taxpayers?
That's the subject of the grant process. So this applicant is.
The taxpayers.
Yeah, so this applicant is tying into a long-term plan and building components of that plan on property that it owns and controls, including the infrastructure that would eventually be needed to signalize the intersection.
Well, I'm not discounting the fact that this applicant is going to be a taxpayer as well, right? Like, I don't want to seem combative on this. I'm just trying to figure out exactly what is being offered as part of this in a way of mitigation. Right? And I don't see very much.
Well, the development of that, what do you call it, the
B-Walt?
The trail, I mean, the sidewalk all the way.
Yeah.
It's a 10-foot sidewalk.
Correct.
All the way down.
Yeah.
So since we're talking about the trail, one of the things we recently did a walk on 50 Otis, and talked about a concept plan, I hope you're working on, for trail access. And one of the things we talked about was possibly a spur up to the target ball fields and along the rear of this site. And I just don't know if that's even part of this plan or if it's just completely overlooked.
It's not part of this application, but we did note that comment in the field. We are looking at that issue. Now, there's a lot that goes into that in terms of other property owners and Target themselves. Years ago, I tried to deal with it when they were doing the multifamily up on the prior project, and it was not a very cooperative scenario. But the applicant here is proposing substantial improvements along Otis Street, putting infrastructure in for the lights, doing the grant applications that may make this a reality. You'll have the ability to look back and say, does it work? If not, why? And maybe it does make sense to have someone look at it and say, what has been designed by MDM or whatever, or the corridor study, and what the impact of this project is, does support what is being proposed, that the impacts are not going to be that great. And I do think there are solutions that, this is the Cadillac, and we're willing to work with the town to get the Cadillac done sooner rather than later. But we feel confident that if that light is not put in today or the driveway is not relocated today, that the project on its own, or the merits of its own, is sufficient. And you need to have someone tell you that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard from Hazel, and she agrees with me. I don't know how the rest of the board feels about a peer review.
I think because it's important for you to feel good about it, for all of us, I would be in agreement with that, Mark. Because I think it matters an awful lot.
I think it matters a lot to the
have the
citizens.
confidence.
Clearly, we're going to get, most of our questions are going to be traffic related. For us to not turn over every stone in that discussion short-sighted. So
I do feel that there's a significant amount of mitigation, particularly the grant, getting the grant done, I think is important. Go to grant with all this other infrastructure in place makes the likelihood of receiving it greater. Having had the study done, I know that's not the same applicant, so that's an excellent point. Different applicant for a different project. So I think that those things are contributions. But I agree. I think the traffic study, because we're really relying in and of itself, without any of the rest, this is okay. I agree. That's important.
it's going to be hard for people to understand why any further development is not going to make things worse there, because it's already pretty bad. I mean, I sit up I take my daughter up there and, sit at that light for 3 cycles. So I do agree that some of your short-term improvements, 2 left turn lanes and redoing the signalization.
The phasing, yeah.
The phasing. Yeah, it did make an, but at Lyman Street, they had, a widening of Lyman Street. I mean, when you go up to that intersection at Christmas time, you have people turning left to Walmart off of Route 9, and it's so far backed up that the left turn lane, the left lane of Route 9 East is not passable. I mean, there'll be 20, 30 cars waiting to take a left up to Walmart. And that's not this applicant's problem, but it is Westborough's problem. Right, and indirectly the state's problem. And I need to feel like we're not making things worse for all those people who are sitting at that light for hours every week.
The first job of any mitigation action is to not make things worse, right? That is the goal. What's shown here on the master plan for Otis Street Corridor is the substantial widening that, quite frankly, I'd rather see this built today than 10 years from now. But that's clearly not something that an individual development entity can afford to do. It would be out of sync which is exactly why we believe the right mechanism for advancing that sooner is the grant application process. And we've been successful, my firm's been successful in working with other consultants and securing state grants that go anywhere from $1 million to $10 million. Under, say, MassWorks, for instance, we've won 2 MassWorks grants in the last couple of years that have infused that cash that not only offset the impact a particular project would have, but they build multimodal infrastructure to support multimodal transportation. An example is Haverhill, the Ornstein shoe factory site along the Merrimack River. You know, we secured a $1 million MassWorks grant to build an extension of the bike path from where the Bradford Rail Trail, where it's currently terminating, all the way to the commercial property that's being developed. It's right across the street from an MBTA station. We're introducing additional pedestrian crossings, RRFB beacon crossings, enhanced sidewalks, and signals. And that's exactly what we're doing here. And
It's great, but I don't live in Haverhill, so I...
No, I know, but I'm saying, the example is that we know, based on actual experience, that when you have a master concept plan like this, that this represents a potentially shovel-ready project that puts it in a very competitive position.
Could I just try to summarize where we are? I think that what I think the board wants to see is the project as designed without the full implementation of the corridor study and all the bells and whistles that would make it really a home run. But with the improvements that we've committed to, which is the path, the sidewalk, whatever you call it, in front, the infrastructure for the light, et cetera, and the location of the driveways, you need independent verification that as designed, without all of the other bells and whistles, that works. This is all gravy and you know, that this, if we can pull this off and get the funding for this, it's nothing but icing on the cake, so to speak. So you need the verification that as designed, the site plan works and what we're saying works, and then we can go from there.
Bob, for me, that would be very helpful. I mean, I think in some ways, unfortunately, that all these possibilities have kind of confused the matter.
Yeah.
For us. I think we really have to look at it as it's being presented and what they're actually asking at this particular time. We can look ahead and, you know, maybe look for mass work funding or some other types of funding to continue the project. But at this point, I think it is important that we go back and really look at the basics and see what it is they're asking without looking at all the possibilities that could be, which I think has confused probably people that are watching this, wondering what it is that we're actually talking about.
But Mr. Chairman, if I may, we'll work with Jim and Bob and come up with a scope to do a review of the project as designed and the implications for traffic as designed. But I would implore that the board consider, given the timing and how this has been set up over the last 15 years, this is an opportunity that you may, that working together, we may be able to get most of this funded.
No, I understand that, but I think we've got to
we almost want to keep that to the side, is what I'm hearing.
Well, I think we have to keep it to the side, Bob.
No, I agree, but
I'm not making decisions on
I
hopes and
understand.
dreams and, you know, relying on the state to come through for us. I just...
But what I'm saying is I don't think there's anything in this as proposed in our project that we need to make our project work.
Okay, well, I need to see.
I understand that, right.
Thank you.
Yeah, corroboration, I think.
Right.
I think Bob's given us proof, but, you know, we need to corroborate
Right, that's
that with a peer reviewer that's working for us, for the town. Jim?
So I'm going to reach out to our peer reviewer and request a scope based on the traffic study for this project.
Okay.
One thing I think that is important for this project that you probably should work on in the interim. And we spoke about the multi-use path. So the multi-use path that crosses 4 of the properties.
We're
the
fine with
applicant.
that. Yeah.
So understand, we need to have the engineering for that path because the next hearing that you're going to, if you're going to stay for that hearing, 66 Otis Street has the path in front of their property too. So we need a consistent design for that path so that their property can include the proper design for that path and that sidewalk as well.
We can coordinate that with him. Yeah.
Good.
That makes sense.
And I think that brings me to the engineering peer review, that we have a scope on that we have to approve. And you've all been given a copy of that. I will get to public comments. I know this is a public hearing, but let's just, if you've all had a chance to read that scope, do we have a motion to approve that?
So move.
Second that.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor of approving the engineering peer review by Teague and Bond as proposed? That's 5-0.
Jim, have we delivered the check? Have a check for it.
Okay, great.
The applicant's already endorsed the plan so that we can move forward with that. I'll ask that you sign a copy. I'll scan it and get it to the engineer tomorrow.
Okay, remind me to do that before we leave. Any other comments, questions? I think I've covered everything, but I'm sure I'll think of something when I go home. But for now,
Comments from the public?
right. Lester, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Lester Hensley, 39 Arch Street. I appreciate that the site plan has considered its location vis-a-vis the sensitive wetlands and the vegetation that exists there. Thank you for that, as well as for the consideration of on-site infiltration of water off-flow. Has the board asked for and has it been provided with confirmation that the site meets the current requirements for open space to developed space ratio? Is there a calculation for that?
It's on the site plan.
Okay.
The zoning requirements are on the site plan.
Thank you. Second question, there seems to be sufficient concern about traffic here. I was a bit surprised to see that the corridor study does not go beyond, that goes up to Fisher and doesn't go beyond. I appreciate, Jim, your comment that, perhaps in a look-back scenario, we might consider impacts on the feeder roads into this area. So you mentioned the Arch Street neighborhood, Gleason Street, Fisher Street extension, all of the feeder roads into this property. I think it's hard to predict where the traffic is going to come and go from. We're using basically DoorDash kind of deliveries here, right, for packages. And unless those are prescribed routes, we've got employees both coming to 50, coming to this proposed site, as well as the deliveries in and out of this site. And I don't think we can lose sight of the fact also that I believe the planning board has sponsored Article 19 on the warrant, which comes from the same proponent that is considering or asking for the overlay D district to be applied to all of these properties, which would then further allow the increase of density on not only this site, but 50 and this entire complex. So I'm not sure that the scope of the corridor study or the peer review is sufficiently broad to impact the overall vision plan for this corridor on the adjacent residential parcels. And I would like to hear the board consider that. I think the board should certainly be considering what the traffic study might predict in terms of impact if, in fact, not only this development gets done the way it's proposed, but if the board votes to and the town votes to extend the overlay D, which will reduce open space to 40% and allow 6-story development, right, on either of these properties, either by the current tenant or some future tenant, right, 20 years from now, there's a significant potential impact to adjacent residential. I'll throw that out there for comment or consideration. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, can I respond to that?
Sure.
There's no intent, the reason for the rezoning is to provide flexibility in the future. There's no plan in place at this point. It would benefit the town as well as the applicant because it allows for flexibility of design. And it's your discretion. You don't have to grant it. We're just trying to figure out if we develop further, and this building or this project is not dependent on the ID at all.
I understand that,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the consideration, and I'm not opposed to this project, but I am interested in understanding that that whatever traffic prediction we're making, right, has to be taken into consideration it's not just flexibility. If in fact the developer chooses to exercise that flexibility, there will be a real and tangible impact to traffic flow if one exercises that density right.
And any future development would require a site plan, traffic study. That would all be looked at. But we were just thinking that it makes sense to provide some flexibility that the town may desire to make a better project in terms of locating the buildings. Not sure we even need it, so.
Yeah, Lester, just to be clear, we haven't even heard that.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to, well, I am conflating the two, but intentionally, right? Because we're going to grant potentially a development here based on a traffic study that is going to be moot come November, right?
Well, this project isn't going to change whether or not that zoning changes. And if it does, it would have to reapply for a new site plan.
Understood.
And at that point,
The overlay deed,
we would.
are you telling me that the overlay deed does not give by right zoning to that?
Well, they would still have a site plan review, and we would have to part of that approval would be traffic impacts, right? But I understand your point, Lester. Again, it kind of gets back to my point that there's a contributory impact of this project towards the future high build-out, impacts that you're talking about, right? Like
There are both. I think
incremental.
I think you're right to bring the scope back to what is proposed for the site. But I think that the corridor study and traffic review study should also take a look at the impact on the feeder roads into this community, which are really hard to predict. I mean, you can't say with any certainty that these deliveries are not going to take Smith Parkway through Arch into Grafton to do that last mile delivery, right? And end up into the other neighborhoods.
Lester, one of the things we've had success with this applicant on another site is a look-back period, right? So that once their site is fully operational, we can look back and see where the traffic is actually coming from, what routes it's using, whether or not we need to discuss further traffic mitigation at that time. So
Yeah,
I think
understand that.
we would probably ask them, and I haven't brought it up yet, but we would probably ask them to do something similar with this site or any future development. I think that's a good policy for the planning board to have, is to build in a look-back period so that we can look back in 6 months or a year. At the other site, we did it to incorporate the Christmas high volume season so that we could look back and say, well, what was the worst of the worst, and what's that impact on traffic in the area, including the feeder roads, and actually have not premises, but actual, impacts and see where the traffic is going and where the cars
The question for me on a look back is, and then what? If the only thing you're left with if for some reason you were horribly wrong and the impact through Fisher Street during school hours and everything else is horrendous, and the only mitigation you have is to tell the drivers on the app that they can't go that way, I don't know if that's sufficient, but maybe that is a way to do it. Just one other comment, you mentioned potentially pursuing a heavy vehicle exclusion on Fisher. I believe there's at least one industrial property across from Press Metal served by heavy trucks off Fisher Street. So
Still use it.
you would need to find alternative access
They
from.
would be exempted for that,
Okay.
because you still have to get to their property, which is on
All
Fisher
right.
Street.
Or through Dana Films, whatever that is now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Questions?
Orange Street is the sun. I guess I wanted to say thanks to those feeder roads on the west side of town. If this is connecting, I don't want to confirm that the site also is ongoing electric. 60% electrical green space, 40% and I'd like to hear that offset the impacts of producing more pollution and more impervious surface on that. I just want that in the record, that the underlying zoning is important values and just that high value ecological policy in the town. And it was mentioned many, many times in multiple groups of our master plan that we need to consider ecological impacts and preserve the ecological character. Well, I just don't want that to be lost in the excitement over the new economic development. I guess I just want that in the record. This is very respectful of people here. It honors the underlying zoning that have been here for over 50 years. I would love us to continue to welcome partners, commercial partners.
Thank you, Jody. Any other public comments? We have a date to continue this?
It's the first Tuesday in October,
At the 5th?
which I believe is October 5.
What do you want a motion?
I move that we continue the public hearing on 64 Otis Street to October 5th, 2021 at 6:30.
Any discussion? All those in favor of continuing? It's 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you for your time and consideration. I'll call you, Jim, to coordinate things.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Jim, maybe?
Thank you.
Jim did.
Okay, so we have one more item on the agenda, well, two more items.
Close the public hearing.
No, we continue.
Oh, because it's continued. You have to open a new one.
Yeah, so the next item on the agenda is a public hearing for 66 Otis Street site plan review application. While the applicant comes forward, I will read the notice of public hearing into the record. Legal notice, Town of Westborough for site plan review hearing pursuant to the rules and regulations relative to site plan review under section 1240 of the zoning bylaws of the Town of Westborough. The Westborough Planning Board will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, September 21st, 2021 at 6:30 p.m. in the Great Hall of the Forbes Building, 45 West Main Street, Westborough, Massachusetts, on a plan to construct a brewing facility and restaurant at 66 Otis Street, Westborough, Mass. The proposed project involves a 12,500 square foot building, 75 parking spaces, and associated site improvements. Any person wishing to be heard should appear at the time and place recited above to be heard. A copy of the application and plan are available for review in the Westborough Planning Board offices at 45 West Street, Westborough, Massachusetts, on the Planning Board webpage at town.westborough.ma.us/planning, and the town clerk's office at 34 West Main Street, Westborough, Massachusetts, during regular business hours. and that is signed by the Westborough Planning Board, and that was in the September 5th and 13th edition of the Telegram and Gazette. With that being said, who is here to speak for the applicant?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Patrick McCarty, McCarty Engineering here on behalf of the applicant, who's also here this evening in the audience, Will Oliveira from 19th Hole Realty. If you could just bear with me for 1 minute while I get everything in order. Okay, thank you. So good evening again. For the record, my name is Patrick McCarty, president of McCarty Engineering based out of Leominster. Here to present this evening for 66 Otis Street. We prepared and submitted an application for minor site plan review on August 30th, which included the complete set of stamped site plans and the other requisite materials, including a butters list, drainage calculations, checks for the filing fees, obviously, and we also included a copy of the then architectural design development set so the board could see what the proposed building would look like. The project is at 66 Otis Street, which is obviously adjacent to the site that we just spent the last 2 hours discussing. We're just slightly north of that, closer to Route 9. It's a 2.67 acre parcel, which is shown on as parcel 4 on map 25 of the Town of Westborough Assessors Maps. The majority of our project is located in highway business, with a small portion in the down here in the corner where my mouse is. That portion is zoned industrial B. It's currently developed with a single-family house up close to the street, and a small garage barn structure at the rear of the site. The existing house is proposed to be demolished, and our intention is to keep the barn. We massaged our site design to keep us at the open space requirement and still be able to keep that barn structure. We think it's kind of neat. We think it ties into the history of this area of being Red's Farm and this being farmland, so we'd like to keep it and redo the exterior of that. Probably just use it for storage, but I think it's a cool aspect of the site to maintain. So the majority of this site, besides the manicured lawn around the house, is open field that's mowed. Our first step in the process, we hired Ecotech, who's a wetland consultant out of Worcester, to delineate the wetlands associated with the kettle pond at the back right corner of the site that's actually on target property, but the buffer zone does extend onto our site. And then we hired Topper Land Survey to do a complete existing conditions survey, which is what you see here. Once we had the background data prepared, we put together our set of proposed site plans. So I'll probably just pull up the rendering. So this is the proposed rendering. As was mentioned, it's a 12,400 square foot building, which would be the new home of Cold Harbor Brewing. Cold Harbor's been here in Westborough on Milk Street for 6 years. I guess it's been a year since we've been talking, Will. So 6 years he's been here in town, and he's looking to stay here in town and grow and expand his business at this new site that he's recently purchased. The rear 4,300 square feet of the building, so where the loading pod is, and about to the end of the parking spots, is about 4,000 square feet. That would be where the actual brewing would occur, brewing and canning and everything that's happening now at Milk Street, just on a slightly larger scale. And then the front portion of the building, about 8,100 square feet, would be a restaurant, kitchen, and support item, private function room, and then we would have, the typical support, bathrooms, janitor's closet, storage, and that of the like. We're also proposing on the right-hand side of the building an outdoor space. It's a 25-foot by 125-foot pervious paver outdoor patio. Closest to Otis Street, it would be screened with a stockade style fence, a wood fence that would tie into the architecture of the building, and I'll show you that in a few minutes on the architectural plans. The front portion would also be covered by a pergola, so there'd be some tables underneath that, and then more kind of flexible space as you get back, maybe some seats around a fire pit, maybe some cornhole boards, just an outdoor, so to create that indoor-outdoor element associated with the restaurant. So the total between the two, and I'm sure Jim's going to catch me on this, is 280 seats indoor and outdoor. Our site plans show 150 seats. So even at 280, at one space per 4 seats, we would need 70 parking spaces, and we're showing 75 on the plan that's before you this evening.
Thank you.
I knew Jim would be on me for that one.
Thank you, I asked for that.
Quickly going through the design elements, so erosion control. The site is pretty flat. There's maybe 1.5 feet of elevation change from the front to the back. As the engineer for the previous project mentioned, you can't get better soil than this. We did test pits in June, 3 on the left-hand side of the building, and I think 3 or 4 in the back, and it's just the most beautiful gravel you could dig, which is a nice change for us because we're a design-build contractor, and it seems like every site we're on lately is either clay or ledge. So to dig in the ground and find that gravel was excellent, and as he mentioned, it's very good for stormwater management. So we have 75 parking spaces proposed, 24 spaces located in between Otis Street and the building, 37 along the side with the ADA spaces closest to the entrance, and 14 spaces at the rear. Also at the rear parking would be a 2-position dumpster pad that would be fully enclosed in a 6-foot white vinyl stockade fence with gates, so it's enclosed on all 4 sides. To keep that trash contained. I already mentioned there's a single loading dock proposed here so that tractor trailer can make deliveries for both the brewery and the restaurant. And when I say tractor trailer, I'm not speaking to the full sleeper cab 18-wheeler that you would see going cross country, more the single axle trailer that you'd see delivering, at the schools or other restaurants with the Cisco label on the side, something that size. We're not expecting the traffic, tractor trailer truck traffic, obviously, that you'd be seeing at the 170,000 square foot project next door to us. We have landscape improvements proposed along the frontage. It's the 3 trees to the left here. It's important to note that those are the 3 existing large trees that are there, and we're maintaining those, and that's why we have that little bend in our driveway coming in off of Otis, so that we can split in between those 2 existing trees and maintain them. We're supplementing that with a few more street trees, foundation plantings all the way around the building. So there's the parking area, a 5-foot concrete sidewalk, and then a landscape foundation planting strip along the front, and mostly down the side except for where the proposed entrance is here at the corner. Site lighting includes pole-mounted fixtures around the perimeter of the parking lot and wall-mounted lights on the building, and photometric plans included in the full plan set. For stormwater, we have 2 separate systems proposed because that's the way the drainage is split now. Currently, about half the site drains to the back towards the kettle pond and half drains towards Otis Street. So the front of the building, we have a catch basin here, and here, which are all 4-foot deep sump catch basins that go to a water quality unit and then to an underground storm tech infiltration system that will overflow to the town drainage in Otis Street. At the rear, so there's about a high point right here in the grading. The rear of the site, there's a trench drain at the loading dock because that is a true loading dock with a 4-foot depression between the building slab grade and the pavement grade. So we have a trench drain there and another deep sump catch basin here that tie together at another second water quality unit that then discharges to a sediment forebay and goes into this excavated at-grade infiltration basin at the rear that only has a riprap spillway for the 100-year storm to the kettle pond. Everything else is infiltrated into the ground. As I mentioned, we did soil testing earlier in the year. At that time, we thought we were going to have an infiltration basin on the left-hand side of the building and at the rear, so we didn't test this area. And so engineering's asked us to do some testing, but based on all the digging that we've done on this site, and Lar Green, who's my employee who used to work for Waterman, had done extensive testing on the adjacent site when he was at Waterman, so we're very confident that the soil is consistent across the site, and the test pit at the front would just be to document those soil conditions. As far as utilities, we're proposing a new 6-inch water line in from Otis Street that would have a hydrant off of it at this first island adjacent to the main entrance to the building. That water line would continue along and into the mechanical room. Just outside the foundation, we would tap off an 1.5 inch domestic line and come into the building. So a single 6-inch in from the street that would split just outside of the building. Sewer, we're proposing to reuse the existing stub that's there from the single-family house. That line would get extended towards the building. One leg of it would go to an exterior grease trap for kitchen waste, and then from the grease trap continue under the building slab back to the kitchen. And on the downstream side of that grease trap, it would Y over and into the building to pick up your regular bathroom and other sink waste that doesn't need to go through the grease trap. And then the other two would be underground gas from National Grid for both the heating system and the boiler used in the brewing process, and then electric, obviously, through National Grid. As far as zoning conformance, both a restaurant and a brew pub and a nano/micro brewery are allowed uses in the zoning district. Our lot area and frontage exceed the minimum requirements. Our proposed building conforms with front, side, and rear setbacks. Our proposed lot coverage at 10.7% is much less than the maximum, the maximum of 40%. And our open space, as I mentioned, we wanted to save the barn, so we're squeaking in there at 60.1% versus the 60% required. And then I mentioned the parking spaces. I need to fix that on a revised set of plans back to Jim, and I'm sure there'll be a couple other comments, but we are providing adequate parking per zoning. The only other permit that we need would be Conservation Commission. We filed both applications concurrently. We've already had our first hearing last week with Conservation Commission, and they had a couple minor comments, which we'll absolutely address, and none of which would be able to be picked up as if you were looking at the design of the project. The first one is an honest mistake on our part, is all engineers do, is a lot of save as in our life, and the abutters letter said Town of Auburn Conservation, the one that went out to the abutters for the notification of the meeting. Obviously, it should have said Town of Westborough. Obviously, the guys in my office, the last one they did was Auburn. They asked us for a stormwater pollution prevention plan, which, as we're disturbing more than an acre of the site, it's a requirement anyways. It gets you coverage under the EPA's construction general permit, and we would do that as a matter of fact anyways, and would be happy to provide a copy. And then just some other stuff like adding the color coding on the plans, some stockpile locations, temporary stormwater basins, which we're happy to show, but fortunately with the soils on this site, I think even if we had all the loam stripped off this site and we got the rain that we got 2 weeks ago, you wouldn't see a puddle there. It's just that good and that able to absorb that much. And then just a little bit of extension of the erosion control barrier. So pretty minor comments from Conservation. Then obviously once we get through hopefully get through the planning board and conservation process, we would have to bring Mr. Leonardo a set of stamped plans and construction control affidavits and sprinkler drawings and all that good stuff so that we could obtain a building permit. Our firm, this is our 39th year in business. We're based out of Leominster. Obviously, I didn't start it, my father did, and I'm a second-generation owner, so we design the projects, permit the projects, we self-perform the site work, and we build the building, do the fit-out, and hand you a set of keys. So we would be the single point of contact from start to finish on the project, and I'm anxious to get going. I'm really excited for Will. I think he has a great beer. I'm not going to lie, I'm an Irish guy. I'm McCarty Engineering. His beer's fantastic. It's going to be a great location for him, and I think he's going to be very successful and continue the success that he's had in Westborough on Milk Street and be able to put him in a state-of-the-art facility. And with that, I'd just like to quickly click through the design development set. So this is a perspective of the building from the Otis Street driveway looking in. So this would be the entrance, windows all along the Otis Street side, and then where the roof height steps up is the separation between the brewery and the restaurant. So this shows the floor plan. When you come in the front door, you have your tables, you have your central bar, the kitchen area, a private function room that leads you both from the restaurant area and the function room to the outside, where you'd have that pergola and various different types of seating areas, maybe a gas fire pit, maybe some cornhole boards, anything of that where we have the indoor-outdoor atmosphere, and then the brewing at the back, and then the support kind of bathroom, break room, office here. Roof plan. Here's some renderings. So on the top of the page is standing in the parking lot. It was actually standing at 64 Otis Street and looking over at Cold Harbor. This is the view that you would see. And then standing at Otis Street, looking at the project from basically the center of Otis Street. The silo to the left is a possible grain silo at some point. Maybe Will, if the board has any questions on that, but at some point, he might introduce a grain silo to be able to bring it in bulk and then feed it in through the side of the building for the brewing process. This would be the view from the top. Here is the view from the Target side, looking across the grass to our outdoor area, and then the rear of the building. And then here's just some more perspectives that the architect put together. Mixture of metal siding, stone, different types of wood, lot of glass, very attractive looking building, in our opinion. And we're hopeful that the board can support our project and help Will continue his growth here in Westborough. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the board?
Yeah, I have a question. Do you envision any thermal efficiency or use of building materials to reduce the carbon impact, future energy efficiency of the structure?
Sorry, just energy efficiency. So Austin Design is the architect. They do a lot. They're out of Brattleboro, Vermont. They've done a lot of brewery design, notably Treehouse, and some others here in Massachusetts, so they're well known. As far as the materials, we're proposing a pre-engineered metal building, but they would be insulated metal sandwich panels for the sides of the building, which have like an R, don't quote me, I think it's R27 on the side, low-E solar band glass in the windows. So a good, solid, energy-efficient envelope. But as far as specifically looking at carbon reduction, I don't believe that Austin's incorporated that.
How tall is the proposed silo? It's a little bigger than the building. But
Yeah, it's a little bigger than the building, which would be...
It says 28 feet on one of the plans there for the back.
Yeah, so it's around 30, I would say. And this is just a graphical representation of it. We haven't even gone down the avenue of picking out a silo or purchasing a silo. This is... So it's pretty neat that the program that they use to design the buildings, he has a million things he can choose from, different people, different vehicles, different interior elements, and so he pulled in a silo for, the purpose of this elevation, but it's not anything that's by any means nailed down. But the one that he's showing here, just for reference, is about 31 feet tall. If I had to approximate it off the 28-foot high eave on the building versus the 24, I'd say, yeah, it's roughly 5 feet taller than that.
Okay, and how many I know he distributes beer to other locations. How many truck loads a day would be leaving from?
A day? That'd be nice.
By the week, okay.
I'm sorry, could you just identify yourself for the record?
Olivero, owner of 66 Otis Street. Question was, how many times are the distributors going to pick up the beer? Twice a month.
Twice a month, and then food, how, to support your business, how, weekly, okay.
Any other questions? Jim, I think you brought up the the multi-use path along Otis. Again, engineering hasn't reviewed this yet. We're still waiting for engineering comments, but can you clarify that for me?
Sure.
Exactly what we're expecting the applicant to do?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to Patrick and to Will, you saw the previous presentation. One thing that we would like you to do is to coordinate, and I thought Bob Michaud was here, but he must have left, with your abutter to make sure that the frontage of your property contains a multi-use path, and that would be sidewalk, and it's 10 feet wide. I think it's probably accomplished within the right-of-way that was mentioned by the consultant in the previous presentation. So it would not be on your property, but the planning board would require you to build the sidewalk. And when you're there doing your parking and doing your foundation, it's an easy thing to do, to require that. So Patrick would reach out to the engineer just to see what that quarter study envisions.
Yeah.
So bounce the sidewalk.
That's why we want to look at it. We haven't looked at that at all.
Yeah, so Jim, if I may, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'm sorry, I know it should be through the chair. You could see right here, and that's just a tree symbol dropped in. It doesn't represent the trunk at the ground, the caliper at the ground. So there's one here, I'm sorry, I'm pointing to my screen, not yours. So there's, one here and one here that we split the driveway between, and then a third one further down. There's not, so the previous project's engineer mentioned a 2-foot grass strip along the shoulder, and then 10 foot, would that be 10 foot of pavement, I assume, rather
Yes.
than 10 feet of concrete? So that would take 12 feet, and we don't have 12 feet from the curb line to the right-of-way line. So some of that impervious area, and Jim and I had this discussion months ago with DRG, talking about another option. If these improvements push us, that's going to create impervious area on our property that we wouldn't otherwise create. If that puts us over the limit to the point that we need a variance or we need to alter our design, that was the discussion that we had.
Talk about it now, offline in a work session.
Okay.
Before we go to that relief problem. I don't think you're going to end up with that, so.
Okay, well, from my perspective, and I'm a little flustered because honestly, I know those guys, and I'm disappointed that they would see my name on the plans and draw all these options, slicing and dicing Will's property and not calling me. So I'm a little, my iris is a little bit up tonight, and I'm trying not to let it affect this hearing, but it's, Will's just made us a very substantial investment in this piece of property, and he's looking to make an even more substantial investment at building this building, and then we see the driveway on the Target side. I think in one of their options was drawn on our patio. It was that close to the building, and then, so he and I were both a little rattled in the discussion, and so if we're coming in the other way, well, I'm just concerned because the impervious area was, we were down to
So just to be
shuffling.
clear, the driveway on the other side is a high-growth concept that would require realigning the target driveway
right
closer to your building. But I think, from the design you have, you could basically go through where the dumpsters are to get out to that new target driveway and just move the dumpsters to where your current entrance is and probably not affect much.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, except it may affect the patio.
But any solution like that would be conceptual at this time and would require substantial investment to make sure the abutters?
Oh, no, I understand, respectfully, I understand that entire part of it. I just, I've been an engineer 21 years now. I've been a professional engineer for 16 of those. I wouldn't ever presume to draw a plan showing improvements on somebody else's property and then presenting it to a board without ever picking up the phone and calling that guy.
Yeah,
and I think that's why I'm a little ruffled today, and I think you can appreciate that.
We're in a rare situation where we have abutters coming in for approvals at the same time.
Right.
I would hope they would work together to achieve our long-term goals, which would be
We're not opposed to working together at all.
traffic flow, ease of utilities, everything. So, I'm a little disappointed on that too. But I don't think that conceptual solution is imminent. That building could be through its economic life before we ever see that come to fruition, right?
Yeah.
So I just...
Understood. Understood. So I
don't want your applicant to get...
Well, I think if you were, it's one thing for me, but if it's, any of us know how to Google and find out what he just spent to purchase that property. He's closed on the property. So if you were sitting there and having just spent that amount of money to build your life stream, and then you see that projected on a screen in front of you, I'm sitting next to him, seeing his face getting red, hearing his breathing, because he's getting more and more fired up as he sees each different slide presented.
But I can also say that if it gets to the point where that light is necessary, it's going to probably benefit the facility to have a light there rather than having the patrons try and get out onto Otis Street with an unsignaled.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too sidetracked commingling the two. The only other thing I'd like to throw in there is the separate driveway for the trucks is not a need-to-have item, it's a nice-to-have item. So they're saying that's what they want operationally, but there's no ITE guidelines or Town of Westborough zoning ordinance that says you have to provide the two driveways. So they're kind of self-imposing part of the problem right adjacent to us.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, those plans that you saw were conceptual for the entire corridor.
Oh, no, I'm talking just their specific
Your
site plan.
project stands alone, so we're just looking at what you proposed. I share your concern.
Yep.
I do, because when you're trying to master plan an entire part of town, because it's the entire west side of town, there needs to be cooperation for landowners. I apologize that you didn't receive that kind of cooperation.
Thank you.
Because you're right. So, but try to understand that the board is looking at your project as a standalone project. Any of those other scenarios are way down the road, and we're not expecting you to anticipate them now.
No, but I would like to say I understand the point of your comment, which is why we're having an engineering peer review, and certainly ask the question as to whether we can consolidate their driveways into one driveway.
Okay, I appreciate that.
About your project.
Yes, let's stay focused on our...
We had that same discussion recently on another project up on the separate driveways, one for the passenger cars and employees, and one for the trucks. We just had that discussion recently with applicant.
I just want to zero in on this project.
Sure.
See if I'm tracking.
Appreciate that.
Applaud the applicant. Thank you for maintaining the tree canopy there. I think what we're talking about here for this is not all the concepts about moving driveways and traffic lights, but making sure we can approve this project while allowing for the sidewalk, essentially, for the trail, which is going to be important for Westborough. It's not going to impact traffic, right?
Oh, no.
Vehicle traffic. So the question is, I want to understand that the question we're asking right now is how to accommodate the trail. That's it.
Well, yeah, I agree with that, but I do think that we should consider future needs from this site and whether, 20 years from now, if that target driveway does get moved, are we going to have to chase somebody for an easement at that time?
So are we asking this applicant to respond to something else other than?
I don't know. I have to think about it because
Well, that's fair. I'm trying to just
I think
zero in on this project as well.
I think all we're looking for at this point was to, you were going to have Jim, you were going to have a working meeting to see where that trail would go and what the effect it would have on those particular trees. That's where we are on that. And then we can talk about the next step.
Yeah, I think my feeling on, the other exit is that, if that ever comes to fruition, the owner of this property will want to do that because they'll find that a better solution because the traffic will be so bad. And they'll be happy to give us an easement at that time to create that, dual driveway. But, so I don't think we need to ask for it right now.
Okay.
But I have run into situations where we wanted to create interconnectivity of sites, and it was difficult to get abutters to work together at that point. And it might benefit putting those easements in place now. Again, I have to think about it, and, I don't necessarily think it's vital at this point, but
I think that's so.
I mean, I think, isn't it the public right away that would go in?
one at a
anyway?
time. Okay, can you wait, Hazel?
I think you need to make that attractive enough that people will be
Can't hear you, Jim.
Sorry. I think you need to make that attractive enough that people would be inclined to do it. And I agree that's probably what you would find. I think that's so conceptual now to ask for that. If it was something we knew was happening in 3 years, I totally agree with you. So that I'd be hesitant to do.
Yeah, okay.
One comment on the trees. I mean, certainly there's, trails are like, I look at our sidewalk where there's trees or telephone poles, you go around it. So, I mean, I'd want to make sure we consider that.
Yeah,
If the
no, I
trail
know.
has to narrow to save the trees, I'd want to consider that.
Yeah, so
I definitely want to save the trees, but I do want the trail. So I think Jim's going to have a working session on that.
And just for your and Will's benefit, Will, a sidewalk on your property under zoning counts as open space. So that's right in our zoning bylaw. Bike trail, sidewalk is considered open space. It's not considered pervious cover because it's for the public benefit.
Okay.
Rabbit hole of the proposed concept of what we saw prior to the presentation. The presentation that was before the board showed a right turn only into my property, no left turn access whatsoever from the commuter rail, from Coughlin Company, from Smith Parkway, any of those businesses coming down Oak Street. It was only a right turn access and then an exit out back into Target so that they could somehow get to the left.
We recognize that, and we only saw that ourselves a couple days ago, so.
And again, I don't think that we're looking for that at this time. So, and I agree with Jim's point about, it's so far in the future that Hazel had another comment, though. I asked her.
No, it's fine.
So you'll do a work session. We have engineering comments still to come. One question I just thought of, I didn't see comments from the fire department. You had mentioned fire pits.
Yep, so the building will be obviously fully sprinkled because of the
Right, but
size.
you
and
had mentioned fire pits on the patio side, and I'm just wondering if the fire department is happy with the access, because they really don't have access to that side of the building.
I will check the file, but I believe the fire department responded saying that they just want fire hydrants. They want to discuss that, and they want to make sure that the site is accessible for their standard, which would mean a swept path analysis.
Right.
The only
for fire
comments I
truck.
have in my file are from the town manager, presumably those are from the select board, and from the sanitarian.
From the Board of Health, yes.
As far as, I don't believe my office has received anything yet.
We will get you those.
Okay.
We'll get you those.
Oh, okay, so we'll definitely get you the comments we have and any future comments, so, including the engineering comments we're still waiting on. What else do we have to cover? I will turn to the public in a second, but anybody else have questions from the board?
What's the proposed length of this project? from start to beginning, like when you actually
We'd like
break ground?
we'd like to honestly start yesterday, because every September I start panicking about the winter. So we'd like to start as soon as possible and have Will open for business by September of next year.
Will I be invited to the grand opening?
Absolutely.
Depends.
Yeah, right. Well, I was there when the first one opened, so, anyway. Any other questions? All right, anybody from the public have questions or comments? Jim, are you all set? Did you have anything else?
Yes, you just need to vote to continue the hearing to October 5th.
Somebody want to make a motion to that?
Same date, the 5th, did you say, Jim?
Yes, October 5th.
I move that we continue the hearing for 66 Otis Street site plan review to October 5th at 6:30 PM.
Second.
Gentlemen, okay, any discussion of the motion? All those in favor? That's 5-0. We post all hearings for 6:30.
Yes.
We'll try and give you a better idea of what to expect, so you don't have to sit through 2 hours. I do appreciate your patience with us. Maybe we can juggle it next time, so you guys go first. But, I do appreciate how long you've sat here, and, we'll try to make that process a little easier for you next time, okay?
Thank you very much.
We have another item on the agenda, which is 400 Freiburg Parkway, continued public hearing on site plan review application. I have a letter from the applicant, and I'll read that into the record. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me on Thursday, September 16th, to discuss the requested mitigation plan for the Verizon project located at 400 Freiburg Parkway. I am formally requesting a 30-day continuation of the planning board decision so that Verizon can properly review the town's requests. Thank you, John Soper. So with that being said, 30 days would be October 21st. Thursday. I think we could just continue it to the night. Continue it up to 30 days?
October 19th.
Okay. All right, so I'll make a motion to continue the public hearing for the site plan review on 400 Freiburg Parkway to October 19th at 6:30.
Second.
I heard Jim second it first, so we'll give him that. Any discussion of that motion? All those in favor? 5-0 in favor of continuing that public hearing. I think we had minutes on the agenda as well. Am I wrong? Approved meeting minutes from August 17th and September 7th. You want to do those, Jim?
Sure. Everyone received from Kristen the draft minutes from August 17th and September 7th. I move that we approve those unless there was any questions or comments.
Okay, any discussion of that motion? All those in favor? That's 5-0 in favor. I would like to announce the Community Preservation Act Exploratory Committee is having a public meeting tomorrow at 7 o'clock in this room for anyone who's interested in the Community Preservation Act and has questions. Please attend.
Televised.
And they're having a second.
It will be televised.
Yeah, aren't they having a second one at
Yeah,
the
there'll be a
firehouse?
second one on the,
Thursday, I think.
yeah, I have it here, sorry.
Yes, the Gibbons Open House.
Sorry, I have to find it. Went by it. That many meetings, oh yeah. The 7th of October, at 7 o'clock, there'll be another public meeting. Not that all our meetings aren't public, I should be
And
clear.
that one's
but
at
this
the
one's intended
firehouse.
for the public. And that one's at the fire station in the meeting room. That's at 7 o'clock on October 7th. All right. Any other business, Jim or Kristen? Anything we're forgetting?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I will make a motion to adjourn.
Second that.
You guys don't want to adjourn? No, I thought.
One item before you do adjourn. So today, my discussions with the town manager, we cannot have an executive session to discuss the water loop issue on the west side of town. We need to have that done in open session. So if it's the board pleasure, I will put that on the next agenda, the 28th, at the end of the meeting, so we can talk about the potential water loop between two subdivisions on the west side of town.
Okay, that's fine.
I'll tell you that.
7th for the Community Preservation Act is at the fire station. All right, we have a motion to adjourn and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor? That's 5-0, 5-0, yes. Have a great night. We'll see you Tuesday.